that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jules and Curve.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jules and Curve. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 12 noon, you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and the breaking news for you this lunchtime, a security breach in Northern Ireland as the details of police officers are found in a top-secret document lying in the street. The Police Service of Northern Ireland says they are aware of the breach and are now investigating. What does this mean for the President's safety as he prepares to speak at Ulster University in the next hour? And as the President prepares to head over the border to the Republic after just half a day in the north, the White House has taken the unprecedented step of declaring the President is not anti-British. Could his Irish roots hamper efforts to keep the peace? And ACAS declares it's ready to step in to solve the doctors' strike, but warns both sides have to agree to any arbitration. What is the diagnosis for an end to the industrial action crippling the NHS? Before that, latest headlines with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom, and we'll start with some breaking news. As you've been hearing, the Police Service of Northern Ireland has acknowledged a major security breach involving US President Joe Biden's visit to Belfast. An investigation is underway after a resident reportedly discovered a list of officers' names detailed to the President's protection. We'll, of course, bring you more on this as and when we have it. Well, this comes as President Joe Biden is holding in-person talks with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in Belfast. Joe Biden says he's there to listen, not to discuss details of a possible US-UK trade deal. But the President did say supporting the Windsor framework, agreed to ease post-Brexit trade barriers in Northern Ireland, is one of his top priorities. Biden will also meet political leaders in Stormont ahead of his speech at Ulster University later. His fifth cousin, Andrea McKivitt, told us she can't wait to meet him. Thousands of junior doctors are striking for a second day. Members of the British Medical Association are staging 4 days of industrial action this week, saying they have no other choice. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay is accusing the BMA of putting patients at greater risk after not agreeing any national exemptions for some services, such as cancer care. Downing Street is refusing to hold further talks with the union unless they abandon the 35% pay rise demand, which they say would cost the taxpayer £2 billion. Conciliation Service ACAS says it's ready to help end the dispute, and junior doctor Melissa Ryan told GB News the increase is needed to retain staff.
Every week, somebody from Canada or New Zealand or Australia sends me an offer and they say, look, we will pay you better, you'll have shorter working hours. And then when you've been here and you're working, sometimes my working week is 70 hours a week. And in conditions where I'm covering the job of 2 doctors, I can understand why people would make that choice. I would like to stay for the NHS. I hope that the doctors stay for the NHS, but I really do believe that we need our pay addressed.
Labour is pledging to get our high streets thriving again by cutting business rates and energy bills. The Labour leader and Shadow Chancellor are in Great Yarmouth today to launch the new 5-point plan. It includes the introduction of vouchers for energy efficiency measures, such as double glazing, heat pumps and electric cars. The Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says they'll also hire 13,000 more neighbourhood police to crack down on antisocial behaviour.
Now, our plan is to centralise some of the procurement in police forces, use that saving to put over extra 10,000 more additional neighbourhood officers on the street. Crime and things takes time, but some of those changes to the tax system, to the incentives, they could be done by government very quickly if the political will was there to do that. And all it's about is making sure there's a more competitive environment, just tilting the balance a little bit in favour of the kind of people you're talking about, so we can have the kind of vibrant high streets, which I think everybody wants, but at the minute, it's fair to say we're not getting.
The Ministry of Defence says there is a serious level of inaccuracy in allegedly leaked documents which claim UK Special Forces have operated in Ukraine. Reports suggest that as many as 50 personnel have been deployed alongside other Western forces, although locations and missions have not been revealed. The classified US documents may have been released on the chat room of the social media platform Discord. The MOD is warning the leak has the potential to spread disinformation. The cost of childcare in the UK is forcing 1 in 4 parents to give up their job or drop out of education. A new study by the global children's charity Their World has found 74% of parents say they find it difficult to meet childcare costs. It's calling on governments to urgently prioritise spending on early years programmes. And in the US, 500 acres have been destroyed as a huge forest fire continues to spread across New Jersey. Aerial footage has captured the dramatic scenes in the east of the state. Authorities say only 10% of the blaze has been contained since yesterday evening, and nearby residents have been ordered to evacuate. The cause of the fire is still under investigation. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. So let's update you on this breaking news with this huge security breach in Northern Ireland as the President, of course, prepares to speak at Ulster University. Now, unconfirmed reports suggest that this top-secret police document was found lying in the street by a Belfast resident. It's said to detail the names of all the officers involved in the President's visit, plus phone numbers and addresses of top Police Service and Northern Ireland officers. In addition, we understand it may reflect what they call hostile vehicle mitigation systems or evasion tactics to be used by the police. Details are road closures. We now have a statement from the Police Service of Northern Ireland to say we are aware of a security breach. An investigation has commenced and we've notified the Senior Information Risk Officer. We take the safety of visiting dignitaries, members of the public and our officers and staff extremely seriously. Of course, the issue is that the President is due to speak shortly in the Ulster University in Belfast, and he will obviously be assessing with his White House staff what additional risks are now being faced. In addition to this, a White House spokesman has already had to take the unprecedented step of declaring the president is not anti-British. Former First Minister and GB News presenter Arlene Foster among those critics who declared the president hates the United Kingdom. Well, the president due to meet politicians from all political parties to persuade them to get power sharing back on track. Sinn Féin's Mary Lou McDonald saying he needed to stop the sense of limbo. Well, after meeting Rishi Sunak, he will be spending just half a day in the north with the president, then travelling over the border to the Republic to retrace his family roots. But a major security operation now at risk, some £7 million, some 300 extra officers drafted in. Let's get more with our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, who's in Belfast. And Dougie, you've been witnessing, of course, all these security things being put in place, the road closures, the barriers and so on. It looks to have been breached by some kind of document being left literally on the street corner.
Well, first of all, it is amazing that a force with this much experience would actually do that, and it makes you wonder why such a document would actually be in existence all in one place. I mean, that sounds like an absolute coalition of all the documents that are here, and I would be very hard thought to actually think that that document might have been there and not placed there by other means. It wouldn't have been accidentally lost. As we speak, actually, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, just to the left of me here, are preparing for either the Prime Minister or Joe Biden to arrive. It will be a major embarrassment for the Police Service of Northern Ireland. The Chief Constable, Simon Byrne, arrived here just about 25 minutes ago. He has been out inspecting the roads all morning, and he was quite confident, really, that everything was very much under control. So this does come as quite a shock to know that that document is out and about at this moment in time. On the way in here, though, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, interesting point as to whether, of course, this was an accident or a deliberate act, but one assumes that given this very tight timetable they've got, they're going to have to assess very quickly what to change and what to leave in place.
Well, these visits, Northern Ireland is very, very much used to high security like this. And I mean, I'm looking down a street here at the moment where there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different options, and none of the press know where this cavalcade is going to come from and arrive at the front door behind us. Everybody would know that they're going to arrive at the door, but whereabouts they come from would be a hard one to actually predict, and that's how they work this. Even the outriders, there is various different teams of outriders, and only one of them know actually who's got the real package, i.e. the VIP behind them. So it may be a breach, but it will not be something, it will be seen as concern, but it will be fixed very, very quickly by just going to another plan. They have plan A, B, C, D, and we have watched this time and time and time again throughout the Troubles in Northern Ireland when VIPs come in. There is very many routes open to them, and I have yet to see anywhere being cancelled because of a breach of security.
And the fact is, of course, that this visit to Ulster University was a pretty quick one before he's then due to go over the border into the Republic, where the security concerns will be for the Garda.
Yes, indeed. They will hand everything from here straight over to the Garda Síochána. That they will meet him at Dublin Airport. But you've got to remember as well that Joe Biden very much has his own secret service there with him. They are very much in control of everything that happens here. Even special branch officers that are with the British Police Force or Irish Police Force have to take a back seat when the Secret Service, the American Secret Service, are in town. That really, they take control, they decide the routes, and they decide who is closest to the president. I mean, over the last couple of weeks here, we have watched many men with American accents lifting manholes, looking down alleyways, and we all know what they're here for. They are checking on the security of the President of the United States. That is the way, it has always been the way. We've seen it here in 1998 in massive terms when even military were brought in at that stage to make sure that Bill Clinton was well protected. So I don't see any problem here today, but there will be much embarrassment about this document. There will be a very big investigation into it, and I would imagine that if it turns out to be absolutely real, well, then heads will roll.
Yeah. The other aspect, of course, and we can see the police behind you, is the suggestions that this document may include phone numbers and addresses of top PSNI officers. And, of course, given the security alert and what we saw in Omagh a month or two ago, that will again be of real concern.
Yes, not to take away from the presidential visit, that is the biggest concern there, that if those personal details have gotten into the public domain, it is a great worry for those officers. Some of them may have to be rehoused, some of them will definitely have to have different cars, car registrations. It brings us back to the sad old days, actually, of the RUC when this happened on a regular basis, and many officers and their families were basically taken out of one area and put somewhere else. So it is very, very serious on that matter, Mark, and I do wait to see what comes out of this and how exactly this document made it onto the street.
Doogie, thank you for the moment. Back to you, of course, as you said, as we learn more. But let's speak now to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, also in Belfast, but where the President is due to speak at Ulster University. And Darren, as we were saying, clearly there'll be a security reassessment going on as we speak. But the meeting with the Prime Minister, we're told, has now finished. The President saying that he was there to listen. What will he have been told by the Prime Minister?
Yeah, just to pick up on the security stuff that you've been talking about, I'm not entirely sure there is going to be a reassessment, Mark. At the end of the day, the security services have made it perfectly clear that while the terrorism threat has been raised, it is towards local forces, and the prospect of violence here, it is not any direct threat to the US President. I don't think Joe Biden's under threat from extremists on either side here in Northern Ireland, so I don't think we're going to see any significant changes at all. I mean, I can tell you the security have locked off pretty much every street for around at least half a mile behind the building behind me. As you say, though, where Joe Biden is due in the next hour or so, he's due to speak actually in around 45 minutes, so he's due pretty quickly, though the Prime Minister, as you've just rightly pointed out, has been having coffee with the US President at his hotel here in Belfast. It was dubbed a bi-latte by the New York Times. Pretty brief conversation, but it must be stated that Rishi Sunak's been quite keen to spend time with Joe Biden. He met him off Air Force One last night. Clearly had that meeting this morning. No necessary need for that. This is primarily a visit to Northern Ireland. This is the third time Rishi Sunak has met President Biden since he became Prime Minister. And I think they do seem to have built up a personal rapport, but there is a deliberate attempt on Downing Street to try and mend relations with the White House, given how strained they've been really since Brexit, but more particularly over this issue of the Northern Irish border.
Yeah, interesting then, of course, that we've had the White House having to take the step of declaring that the President is not anti-British. And maybe as evidence of that, we understand actually they were sharing a cup of tea there in the hotel rather than a cup of coffee. So maybe that's one of the first steps. But, of course, this comes as many have criticised the sort of short, half a day that he's spending in the north of Ireland before going on and spending 2.5 days down in the Republic.
Yeah, and I think that's a reflection of the political reality here in Northern Ireland. First of all, let's be honest about this, Stormont is not up and running. There is no Northern Ireland executive. And this idea that Joe Biden was going to address MLAs, well, that's clearly not going to happen when Stormont is not in existence. I think also there is a sense that the US need to play this quite sensitively. The unionist community here, frankly, do not trust him. They view him as a bit too Irish Joe, if you like. And we heard that reflected, didn't we, from Arlene Foster last night on GB News, the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, saying that she felt that Joe Biden was anti-British. Now, the Americans have hit back today, the administration spokesperson saying that is clearly simply untrue, and also saying that, well, he's very proud of his Irish-American roots, very proud of his relationship with Ireland, that he is a strong supporter of the UK, both bilaterally and also in institutions such as the G7, NATO and the UN Security Council. But you know what? Joe Biden is here to see the whole of the island of Ireland. He's going to visit some of his ancestral homes a little later on today, and indeed later on this week. And you're right, he's going to spend the majority of time in Dublin, addressing both houses of the Irish Parliament and meeting with the Irish President. And this is not least of all because there's a big Irish-American community in the United States. And if Joe Biden's going to try and seek re-election, he could do with their support. But this is a man who's very proudly Irish, or talks about Ireland a hell of a lot. As many pointed out, he's probably the most Irish-American president the US has had since JFK back in the 1960s.
Yeah, of course, who were the first to visit the Republic, and obviously Biden wanting to, I think, with Joe Kennedy on board in terms of this White House pact with him, wanting to hark back to those days. But for the moment, Darren, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as we hear or see the President arriving. Well, let's speak now to John Laverty, Executive Editor of the Belfast Telegraph. John, just to first get your reaction to this extraordinary story about the security breach. I mean, Doogie was raising the question, well, accident or deliberate?
An extraordinary story indeed. And it's remarkable the way it came about, actually, because it happened on a talk show this morning, on a radio talk show, and the subject of the talk show initially was your colleague in GB News, Arlene Foster, obviously talking about saying that Joe Biden hates the UK. Now, suddenly then one gentleman called up. We thought it was just an hour caller to talk about Arlene or Joe Biden, and he said, "I have in my hand a document which has all these operational manoeuvres on it, and also police officers' phone numbers." And suddenly the whole thing just, if I can use an unusual term, exploded. You know, it's something. It's not a threat to Joe Biden in Belfast by any means, but it is an extremely, I think Darren said it too, an extremely embarrassing situation for the PSNI, and also a serious security situation for the officers whose names and numbers. I'm not sure. I heard somebody say there about address. I'm not sure about that, but certainly phone numbers were on that, and operational manoeuvres.
What we understand, and this is not confirmed, is that the document may contain the phone numbers and addresses of what's termed top PSNI officers, but also what they call hostile vehicle mitigation systems, i.e. what they do in terms of the operations within the city centre for any threat, and indeed the details of all the road closures. Now, clearly everyone in Belfast knows which roads are closed at the moment. It's all pretty obvious, but one wonders how on earth, number one, you know, all this was in a document not under lock and key, and how it was just literally found on the street.
Well, exactly. These questions will be pertinent long after Joe Biden has left, and he'll be leaving in a 2 or 3 hours' time. In fact, you know, he has slept as long in Northern Ireland as he's been awake in Northern Ireland. I mean, it's been like a 16-hour trip for him before he goes down south. But, I mean, it's something that the PSNI will have to answer. I mean, the operations, yes, that's one thing, but there's so much detail. I mean, I haven't obviously seen it myself, but there appears to be so much detail in this. It's unnecessary detail. You would call it's a 5-page operational document.
Yeah,
it just brings there's far too much detail in it from what we've heard already. And it's something that Simon Byrne, the Chief Constable, will have to answer today. I mean, not tomorrow or the next day. He has to answer today for this.
And one assumes that the American Secret Service will be asking some pretty pertinent questions as well. But just to return, John, to the issue you raised about this Biden hating the UK, or the White House then saying, no, that's not the case. I mean, how much traction has that got there in Belfast, with obviously, just half a day being spent there before he goes over the border into the Republic?
Well, I mean, in terms of this, the Arlene Foster comment, I mean, it was getting a lot of traction until this document turned up. And there's a little bit of irony here because Dame Arlene obviously said that. It was a very strident comment from her. But later, in a few days' time, she's going to meet Hillary Clinton, and she's going to be one of the 25 women lauded for helping bring peace to Northern Ireland. So it wasn't very diplomatic with a few days to go before she meets Joe Biden's friend Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State and, of course, former presidential candidate, to meeting these women in the other Belfast university queens, and they're going to be lauded there. So but yes, plenty of traction for what Arlene said. It was she's normally a bit more diplomatic than that. I mean, her unionist roots are very strong, of course, but it doesn't usually get as strong as that.
John, thank you very much indeed. Back to you, of course, as we get more on this breaking news. John, Executive Editor at the Belfast Telegraph. Just to reiterate what we're hearing from the police service in Northern Ireland, we are aware of a security breach. An investigation has commenced. We've notified the Senior Information Risk Officer, and we take the safety of visiting dignitaries, members of the public and our officers and staff extremely seriously. We'll have all the latest from Belfast coming up. Stay with us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Jules and Curve. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's just update you on this breaking news we got from Belfast with these reports that a top-secret police document may have been discovered on the street with the names of all officers involved in the security operation concerning President Biden's visit, plus phone numbers and addresses of top PSNI officers and vehicle mitigation systems, road closures, lots of details. Police service in Northern Ireland saying we are aware of a security breach. Let's speak now to Baroness Nuala Patricia O'Loan, former police ombudsman for Northern Ireland. Nuala, thank you for your time. Clearly, we don't know how detailed these sort of addresses and phone numbers are, whether in fact it is a top secret police document, but clearly it's going to have to be taken seriously. They may have to reassess the security position at the moment.
Oh, I'm quite sure that they are currently engaged in a serious risk assessment of what's happened here. There have been many facets to it, but the first thing is on the ground, what's happening. Was there anything in that document which has in any way may have be compromised as a consequence of the discovery of it? I find it almost incredible that this could have happened, you know, that a document of this huge amount of content. It sounds to me like the operational plan for the visit, for Biden's visit to the University of Ulster or something like that. And the fact that it has actual, you say, names and addresses, I can't understand why they would have addresses on the document. So I'm asking more questions almost than I think I'm able to answer for your listeners. But I do think that there's a major problem here for the PSNI. And the question is, where was it found? You know, was it found in a Republican area? Was it found outside the university where the president's coming in? Who found it? Who placed it there? Was it placed there? Did somebody drop it? And why would they have a paper copy of a document like that? Why wouldn't they be doing it digitally on a tablet of some kind, you know? But I just have so many questions. And as you say, the primary one will be, is there any additional risk as a consequence of this?
Indeed. I mean, the police service for Northern Ireland saying we are aware of a security breach, but clearly that's one of the questions, you know, is this devilment at play where someone is trying to cause disruption? But clearly every risk has to be assessed. And I guess the other indication is you've not just got the police service in Northern Ireland, you've got the American Secret Service involved in all this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're suggesting that they're on this list. Are you suggesting that?
At the moment, all we know is it concerns police service of Northern Ireland, but clearly you have two separate intelligence levels, if you like, and two groups having to work together. We're just seeing the motorcade now as we speak in Belfast with what appear to be police vehicles, but of course they're the separate American Secret Service vehicles as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a major operation to move the president anywhere, and all those roads have been closed for so long that I think this part of the operation will just run absolutely smoothly. I don't see any difficulty with that at all. You'd need to know what's in the document to know of any additional security risks which may derive from the content of the document. But I'm quite sure President Biden will get into the University of Ulster and all that will go very smoothly and there'll be no hiccups.
You make an interesting point, however, and that is that quite often these things aren't paper copies, that they're held in laptops or in hard drives and so on.
Well, if it's an operational document for the commanders on the ground, you'd expect them to have it on tablets and things, and you certainly wouldn't expect them to be wandering around the streets with 5-page documents to fall out of their pockets. That just beggars belief, you know, it's as simple as that. So I don't understand how this document got there in the first place, and that was why my initial question was, is it genuine? But the PSNI are clearly taking it seriously, and that adds credibility to it.
Yeah, and clearly with their American cohorts, they have to be seen to be taking it seriously as well.
Yeah, I mean, the American intelligence people will be there on the ground and they will be doing absolutely what you say. There'll be no scope for, hopefully, anything go wrong.
No, indeed. What do you make then of the political aspect of this and what's being said about President Biden himself? I mean, clearly eyebrows were raised when it was noted it was just half a day in Northern Ireland and the rest in the Republic. And, of course, we now have a bit of political fallout with the White House having to say, no, he's not anti-British.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was ever a question that he was anti-British. I think America wanted to see the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement up and running, and in particular the Assembly up and running. They wanted to be able to celebrate the Good Friday Agreement in full. And they can't because those institutions aren't working, many of them at present. So I do think that it's a very difficult, and I think it's for that reason that it's not a full state visit. But the president has come, and that's important. And he's come because it is the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. I think that I know from what I heard from various sources that the real hope and expectation was that the Assembly would be up and running when the Windsor framework to the protocol was agreed. That didn't happen. Yeah. And I think it's for that reason that we didn't have a state visit.
But certainly the president saying he is listening and, as he said, wants to keep the peace. So we'll obviously monitor what he's got to say at the Ulster University shortly. Baroness Malone, thank you very much indeed for joining us from GB News and bringing us your view on what's been happening. Thank you very much indeed. Latest live from Belfast as we get it. Let's reflect that the Conciliation Service, ACAS, says it's ready to help to end the dispute between junior doctors and the government. The two parties still at loggerheads in day 2 of the 96 hours of strike action staged by junior doctors. But the BMA says something needs to be done to start brokering realistic talks. Let's speak to our political reporter, Catherine Foster, who's outside St Thomas's Hospital in London. And, of course, the doctors are still indicating that the problems they've got in their working conditions as well as pay. But we've had no indication from either side that negotiations are underway or about to start.
No, certainly no negotiations taking place, nor any prospect of them beginning imminently. So 47,000 junior doctors walking out at hospitals up and down the country. They make up 45% of the medical workforce, so very real concerns about patient safety, and over 300,000 operations set to be cancelled, operations and appointments set to be cancelled this week. Now, the junior doctors on a picket line just a little bit earlier, I was talking to one of them. She was telling me that she was routinely doing 60 to 70-hour weeks. She said many of her friends have gone abroad, that they feel absolutely exhausted. She says she's often doing the job of 2 to 3 doctors because they are so short-staffed. So the BMA holding firm for 35%, though they are now suggesting they are prepared to negotiate on that. They are suggesting bringing in the conciliation service, ACAS, because they say there is no trust between the union and the government. The government, for its part, I was at the Downing Street lobby briefing yesterday. The Prime Minister's spokesman said very clearly that for the government to come to the discussion, to begin to talk, they needed the BMA to drop the 35% pay demand and to stop the strikes. There is no sign of that happening at the moment, and huge disruption to patient services, and these NHS backlogs that the Prime Minister has made one of his 5 key priorities to get down are only going to be going up at the moment due to these strikes.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed for that, and of course we'll see what emerges from ACAS and involvement or not, as the case may be, of course. And apologies for the microphone sound. Yes, the wind is picking up. We're being told Storm Noah is on the way. 70-mile-an-hour gusts predicted across the UK. We'll update you on that fairly shortly. And, of course, all the latest from Belfast. But first, all the headlines with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12:33. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. In the last hour, police in Northern Ireland have acknowledged a potential major security breach involving US President Joe Biden's visit to Belfast. The PSNI is investigating after a resident reportedly discovered a list of officers' names detailed to the president's protection. Joe Biden's 4-day trip to Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic has seen 300 officers drafted in from the rest of the UK to bolster his security. While the risks of this potential breach are as yet unknown, but of course we'll bring you more detail on that when we get it. In-person talks between President Joe Biden and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak have come to an end. Biden said he was there to listen, not to discuss details of a possible US-UK trade deal. The president did, however, say supporting the Windsor framework, which was agreed to ease post-Brexit trade barriers in Northern Ireland, is one of his top priorities. Biden is on his way to meet political leaders in Stormont ahead of his speech at Ulster University. We'll bring you that live here on GB News from 1 p.m. Thousands of junior doctors are striking for a second day. Members of the British Medical Association are staging 4 days of industrial action this week, saying they have no other choice. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay is accusing the BMA of putting patients at greater risk after not agreeing any national exemptions for some services, such as cancer care. Downing Street is refusing to hold further talks with the union unless they abandon the 35% pay rise demand. And Labour is pledging to get our high streets thriving again by cutting business rates and energy bills. The Labour leader and Shadow Chancellor are in Great Yarmouth today to launch the new 5-point plan. It includes the introduction of vouchers for energy efficiency measures, such as double glazing, heat pumps and electric cars. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it. it like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on this breaking news of the security breach in Belfast during this presidential visit by Joe Biden. We're now learning that, indeed, the police service of Northern Ireland believe that this breach concerns what they call an operational order, which does indeed contain details of all the officers being deployed in the city centre during the presidential visit. It's believed copies of this order were issued to all officers on duty in the city. It's a 5-page document marked sensitive, information on road closures, officer contact details, what they call hostile vehicle mitigation systems, i.e. How to avoid problems with any vehicles coming towards the presidential motorcade and so on. So the PSNI is saying we are aware of the security breach. An investigation has commenced and we've notified the senior information risk officer. However, it does appear that the presidential visit itself is carrying on as was originally slated. The president, we're being told, has in the last few minutes met the leaders of the 5 largest political parties after arriving at the Ulster University campus in Belfast. That's Sinn Féin's Stormont leader Michelle O'Neill, the DUP's leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, Alliance leader Naomi Long, UUP leader Dougie Beattie and SDLP leader Colin Eastwood. They met with the president briefly, we're being told, but of course he is now due to deliver this address at the university. And he told the reporters in the press pack that he was here to listen after meeting Rishi Sunak at that hotel in central Belfast. Let's just get the views now of our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, joining us in the studio. Tom, just first of all, a reflection on this. They're trying to play down the security breach a little, but it does seem extraordinary that given the measures that were put in place, literally last night, we believe about 6 o'clock, this document was found on the street in Belfast.
Hugely concerning, not just for the event today, but also for those that are policing the event. Names, addresses, potentially going into the future. This could be something that rolls on and on. We have to ask the question, is it only good hands that this document has ended up in? Who else might have seen this along the way? Certainly a big concern for security services.
Yeah, not marked top secret, but sensitive, we understand. So clearly it had to be in circulation for obvious reasons. But the presidential visit does seem to be going ahead as planned with this Ulster University visit, but only half a day in the north of Ireland, and this has been reflected. Arlene Foster, of course, GB News presenter, she has indicated, along with other critics, that the president is no fan of the UK.
Well, it's certainly a view that has been widely expressed, particularly in Northern Ireland recently. There are many different examples of Joe Biden joking about his Republic of Ireland heritage in the past. He grew up learning to get over his stammer by reciting Irish poetry. And so he has a great affinity to those perhaps more nationalist Irish poets of the last century. But it is interesting that he is only staying in the province for 16 hours in total, arriving just after 9 p.m. last night. About half of those 16 hours he spent asleep before meeting Rishi Sunak at 11. And in the next few minutes, he will be delivering this speech that the visit is really all about at Ulster University. Interestingly, the time that was made for the party leaders in Northern Ireland was very, very small. It was a brief, almost informal chat before this speech. As we speak now, these 5 party leaders are actually sitting next to one another in the front row of the audience. So perhaps the speech itself, while the discussions with the president beforehand might not have been the most meaningful, perhaps that act of getting them all together and perhaps they're chatting while they're waiting for the president to go out and speak, perhaps that's doing something.
Yeah, and we don't know, of course, what's being said or discussed behind the scenes, but he told Rishi Sunak, or the reporters, when he met Rishi Sunak, he was there to listen. But, I mean, it is interesting that he's actually in the centre of Belfast, staying at this hotel, not out at Hillsborough, where, of course, one might expect. And I think the last one to do that was Bill Clinton, he decided to stay in the city centre to actually underline the importance of the Good Friday Agreement, what it was doing for the people of the city.
Of course, with Bill Clinton, it was a bigger issue for that time. Belfast was a much less safe place than it is today. It was probably a bit more of a symbolic move for Bill Clinton the first time he visited.
You wrote the most bombed hotel in the world, as they celebrated.
Only 2 pubs, apparently, in Belfast that were reliable or safe to go into. Safety cages on the outside of pubs to check people before they went in. Very, very different place now to how it was reportedly in the 1990s. But it is interesting that the more fancy state banquet, castle visits, all that sort of stuff, that's happening in the Republic rather than in the province of Northern Ireland. And that might say something to how Joe Biden sees these 2 parts of the world. He certainly sees himself, his heritage, as much more Republic of Ireland, and we'll be getting all of the fancy parts of his visit, the parts for which he's brought his family along to see in the coming days. But yes, shortly after he gives his speech this afternoon, he's down to the Republic.
And I notice on this, the White House pack is another name, Joe Kennedy, Special Envoy to Northern Ireland, of course, and we're talking about US presidential visits. And JFK was the first big one, of course, going out in the 60s to retrace his family's roots.
About 6 months before he was assassinated. And he was the first US president to visit the Republic of Ireland. It was a huge moment for that country at the time. It had been suffering economically since it broke off acrimoniously from the United Kingdom, particularly when it moved from being what was called the Irish Free State into the Republic of Ireland, ditching the monarchy and lots of links with the United Kingdom. The economy really suffered. There was a huge amount of emigration, and it took a long time for an independent Ireland to get going. But this visit from JFK in 1963, I think it was a big turning point for a nation sort of trying to find its own feet and discover who it was. And that's remembered for generations in that country.
And I think Joe Kennedy actually has just been talking about JFK and, of course, those links. And you know, we reflect, of course, that the whole issue the importance of the Irish roots to American politicians, particularly in Boston, which was JFK's power base, of course. But one wonders whether President Biden's been made aware of the sensitivities in pushing that line a bit too much.
Well, there is an argument here that the Americans have always been closer to the nationalists than the unionists. And the argument goes that in the 1990s, when Bill Clinton visited, what really needed to happen was to bring the nationalists into the tent. The nationalists were the ones that needed to be spoken to and convinced that this was a worthwhile thing to do. Yeah. The situation is very different now. The people that are not engaging in executive formation aren't the nationalists, they're the unionists. Yeah. And so there's an idea that actually Biden's presence is a very, very different thing in Northern Ireland compared to Clinton's presence back in 1995. Biden today being closer to the nationalists, perhaps it's wise to not stay in Northern Ireland for too long. Perhaps he's not the messenger to bring the unionists into the fold. Perhaps it's very, very different to what we saw America, sort of the role that they acted as in the 90s.
Yeah, but interesting that Mary Lou McDonald from Sinn Féin saying, the president needs to stop this sense of limbo, which is an interesting sort of observation. Tom, for the moment, thank you for that. But let's actually head back to Belfast and get an update with Doogie. Doogie Beattie still there in the city centre for us on the fallout, if that's the right word, from this security breach, Doogie. A few more details coming out. As you were suggesting, it does look to be what they call this operational note, which, of course, many of those officers behind you there would have been aware of and marked as sensitive rather than top secret.
Yes, a sensitive document. Well, anybody that's terrorist-related could soon put a sensitive document into some sort of map of where anybody would be going, although it does mainly say about streets that are closed. And as I was saying earlier on about they could bring them in anywhere, well, the American Secret Service have obviously took that security breach quite seriously, because there is barriers just to my right here with some of the public standing there, huge tents at the bottom that house the media of the world, which are all based down there. And of course the cavalcade came in a different road and they brought Joe Biden in a side door. That says how seriously they're actually taking this security breach. So it will be interesting for me as the reporter in this region over the next few days to see who exactly was responsible for printing out that type of information on the hard copies to be put around officers who somebody obviously left it where they shouldn't have. And that will be a big question to answer in the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Douala Alone, of course, speaking to us a few minutes ago, saying, well, normally these sort of things are held in a computer or on a tablet or a hard drive. There aren't bits of paper that can be taken or left or fly away.
Yes, I mean, the PSNI is a totally professional police force. They deal with this sort of stuff all the time, and it seems a totally mindless act that somebody may have printed this out off their laptop or off their tablet or whatever and brought it with them and left it somewhere. That is the only thing that you can think, because with that type of information on board, it is going to cost the PSNI an awful large amount of money to replace phones and everything else that goes with it. So just as we were speaking, another cavalcade coming in. It beggars belief that someone would have done that, and I'm sure there will be a massive investigation into that with the PSNI. It may take a day or two for that to come to light, to just exactly who it was that did that, but I'm sure that it will come out very, very shortly.
OK, and just to reflect on what we've been seeing in Belfast in terms of the meetings with Rishi Sunak and then the other political leaders, I mean, we're being told that those 5 leaders, it was very much a brief chat, not a formal session as such.
Yes, as I was actually walking around the side of the building, I bumped into some of the local politicians on the way in, just about 15 minutes before the president arrived here, and they said they hadn't spoken to him at all. So if you can imagine, in those 15 minutes, then when he comes in the side door, they must have spent no more than 5 minutes with him. So really, what has been gained here in Northern Ireland with this visit? Well, it would seem very little. It's more of a reassurance from the USA saying, look, we are standing here, we are here ready to help you, but there doesn't seem to be much more than that, and it pretty much leaves Rishi Sunak still trying to sell his framework document to the Unionists in Northern Ireland.
OK, Doogie in Belfast, thank you very much indeed for that. Bit more breaking news coming through for you now. We're being told the Scottish Government to launch a legal challenge to the Westminster bloc on its controversial gender reforms. Of course, those proposals to allow people to self-identify their sex. Now, they were passed by the Scottish Parliament in December last year, but then, of course, blocked by the UK Government because of its impact on UK-wide equality laws. Humza Yousaf, the First Minister, previously describing the move as undemocratic veto, but indications now that there will be a legal challenge launched by the Scottish Government, of course, led by the Scottish Nationalist Party. We'll update you as we get more, as we will on what's happening in Belfast. Stay with us here on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Jules and Curve. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, President Biden is due to speak imminently at the Ulster University in Belfast. There he is. Let's listen to what he's got to say.
Public figure in this country, and I show up, promise you won't say Joe who is outside. You say Joe Biden, remember, just remember me, okay? Promise? All right. Chancellor Davidson, Vice Chancellor Bartholomew, thank you for hosting us today on this beautiful campus of Ulster University. I came here in '91 in this neighborhood, and you couldn't have a glass building like this here in this neighborhood. I don't think it would have stood up very well. But things are changing. Lord Mayor Black and Secretary of State of Northern Ireland, Heaton Harris, thank you for the welcome to Belfast. And Mr. Speaker and leaders of Northern Ireland's leading 5 political parties, I was honored to welcome you to the White House a few weeks ago, and it's wonderful to see all of you again today. And Ambassador Hartley, thank you for your outstanding work leading our mission to the UK. Ambassador Hartley is an old friend and the former ambassador from Great Britain to the United States. The home of that ambassador and the embassy is along the fence line of the Vice President's residence, which I lived in for 8 years. And the Vice President and I became friends with the ambassador. And his last trip back home before he came back to Washington to serve out the final few months of his term, he told me he was going to bring something back for me. And so I didn't know what he had in mind, but when he came back, we had him over the house. We spent some time together, he and his wife and I and my wife. And he brought back a book with a photograph on the front of the book. It had been just reprinted, the book, of a somewhat stout British captain in his quarters with a big bulldog sitting next to him. And his name was Captain George Biden. Because he used to always kid me and saying, you know, Biden's English. You talk about the Irish, Biden's English. And he told me that he went back and he had the Lord Admiralty, this is God's true story, check. And my great 1840, I think it was 1842, could have been 1828, I can't remember, it's one of those two dates, had written the rules of mutiny for the British Navy. And I said, well, at least that part's consistent, Reverend, mutiny. But anyway, he used to always kid me when I'd say, you know, talk about, he'd say, yeah, you talk about the Irish. He said, you're English, I should remember that. Then I found out, my sister and I found out the name Robinette, my middle name's Robinette. I thought that all those years it was French. They must have been Huguenots because they came to Great Britain in the 1700s somewhere along the way. And they're all from Nottingham, so I don't know what the hell's going on here. You come back, it's confusing. And anyway, Consul General Naran and Envoy, Special Envoy Joe Kennedy, thank you for your efforts to continue deepening and strengthening the ties between Northern Ireland and the United States. It's good to see Belfast, a city that's alive with commerce, art, and I would argue inspiration. The dividends of peace are all around us, and this very campus is situated in an intersection where conflict and bloodshed once held a terrible sway. The idea, as I said, to have a glass building here when I was here in '91 was highly unlikely. Where barbed wire once sliced up the city, today we find a cathedral of learning, built of glass, and let the shine light out in and out. It just has a profound impact for someone who's come back to see it. You know, it's an incredible testament to the power and the possibilities of peace. 25 years ago this week, the landmark Belfast Good Friday Agreement was signed. And it wasn't easy. I was a United States Senator at the time, and I worked very closely with my good friend George Mitchell, who will be here, I believe, in a couple days. And there were no guarantees that the deal on paper would hold. No guarantees that it would be able to deliver the progress we celebrate today. It took long, hard years of work to get to this place. It took a people willing to come together in good faith and to risk boldly for the future. Leaders in peace like John Hume and David Trimble and David Irvine and Monica McWilliams and Mary Robinson, etc. They were all people that I got to meet back then. And it took people all across Northern Ireland who made the choice to work for a brighter and a shared future. At the time, it seemed so distant, some of it. It seemed so distant. First at the ballot box, and everyday sense, the acts of seeing each other through the lens of a common humanity, which again, when I first came here as a young senator, didn't seem like it was realistic. It took pioneering women across all communities and parties that said enough, enough, and demanded change, as well as a seat at the negotiating table, including through the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. And it took a determined effort of my good friend, someone who embodies the country's commitment to all the people in this region, Senator George Mitchell. And, you know, his time serving as Special Envoy for Northern Ireland is one of the great examples in history of the right person for the right job at the right time, in my view. I think sometimes, especially when the distance of history, we forget how hard-earned, how astounding that peace was at the moment. It shifted the political gravity in our world. Literally, it shifted the political gravity. In 1998, it was the longest-running conflict in Europe since the end of World War II. Thousands of families had been affected by the Troubles. Losses were real. The pain was personal. I need not tell many people in this audience. Every person killed in the Troubles left an empty chair at that dining room table and a hole in the heart that was never filled for the ones they lost. Peace was not inevitable. We can't ever forget that. There was nothing inevitable about it. As George Mitchell often said, the negotiations had, quote, 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. But they kept going because George and all the many others never stopped believing that success was possible. And I want all of you to know, especially the young people in the audience today, and don't jump, okay? Oh, I didn't see it all the way up there. As my father would say, please excuse my back, I apologize. But all kidding aside, the American people are with you. Every step of the way, it's real. Those of you who've been to America know that there is a large population that is invested in what happens here, that cares a great deal about what happens here. Supporting the people of Northern Ireland, protecting the peace, preserving the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is a priority for Democrats and Republicans alike in the United States, and that is unusual today because we've been very divided on our parties. This is something that brings Washington together. It brings America together. I spoke about this with Northern Ireland's political leaders as well as the Taoiseach and our St. Patrick's Day celebration at the White House. It's been the key focus for me throughout my career. I remember working as a senator to see how the United States could support and encourage bit by bit any moves toward peace. I got elected in 1972 as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate. And it was just the start of it. I mean, it seemed like it was a goal that was so far away. I remember coming here, as I said, in 91, seeing this city divided and barricaded. Then in 94, when the ceasefire was declared, it was like a sea change. Tide of violence began to recede, hope rolling in. In 1998, overwhelming joy. It's hard to communicate just how deeply invested in your success, the people across the United States are. And those of you who've been there know it. You know it. I'm not making this up. This is real. It's almost people can taste it. The family ties, the pride, and those ultra-Scots immigrants, those ultra-Scots immigrants who helped found and build my country. They run very deep, very deep. Men born in Ulster were among those who signed the Declaration of Independence in the United States, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for freedom's cause. The man who printed the revolutionary document was John Dunlap. He hailed from County Tyrone. And countless others established new lives of opportunity across the Atlantic, planting farms, founding communities, starting businesses, never forgetting their connection to this island. As a matter of fact, as you walk into my office in the Oval Office in the United States Capitol, guess what? You know who founded and designed and built the White House? An Irishman. No, not a joke. Not a joke. Passing it down generation after generation. Your history is our history. But even more important, your future is America's future. Today's Belfast is the beating heart of Northern Ireland and is poised to drive unprecedented economic opportunity and investment from communities across the UK, across Ireland, and across the United States. The simple truth is that peace and economic opportunity go together. Peace and economic opportunity go together. In the 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, Northern Ireland's gross domestic product has literally doubled. And I predict to you, if things continue to move in the right direction, it will more than triple. There are scores of major American corporations wanting to come here, wanting to invest. Many have already made homes in Northern Ireland, employing over 30,000 people. And in just the past decade, American business has generated almost $2 billion in investment in the region. $2 billion. Today, Northern Ireland is a churn of creativity, art, poetry, theater. Some of our favorite television shows, the movies are filmed here, as you know. And I understand the star of the recent Oscar-winning film and someone of Belfast barista, James Martin, is here today. James, where are you? I got to meet James, and I got my picture taken. I'm going to go home and brag to my daughter. Cruise ships packed with tourists filled Belfast port. And young people, instead of fleeing for opportunities elsewhere, can see their futures and careers for themselves that speak to unlimited possibilities here. How many of you have heard over the years, those you old, closer to my age, Mom, Dad, there's nothing here for me. I'm going to move. I'm going to leave. I got to go. It's not happening now. So it's up to us to keep this going. Keep building on the work that has been done every day for the last 25 years. To sustain the peace, unleash this incredible economic opportunity, which is just beginning. I promise you. You think I'm joking. It's just beginning. We get this, keep it going. We all know there's more we can do together. You know, there's so much energy and dynamism, especially among young people who are starting their own businesses, blazing their own trails, connecting to the global community of entrepreneurs. And young people in Northern Ireland are on the cutting edge of sectors that are going to define so much of the future. Cyber, technology, clean energy, life sciences. Here in Northern Ireland, programs like Young Enterprise Northern Ireland, helping thousands of young people each year gain skills and pursue their goals as entrepreneurs. That's why I asked Joe Kennedy, my new special envoy in Northern Ireland of Economic Affairs, to help supercharge that work, to bring more businesses, more investment, more opportunity here to Northern Ireland, and help realize the enormous economic potential of this region. Because I know parenthetically, when that happens here, it gives faith to people around the world. It can be done here. It can be done in my community. Not a joke. The world is changing. It's changing drastically. And it presents enormous opportunity, but also significant dangers. To that end, later this year, Joe's going to be leading a trade delegation of American companies to Northern Ireland. Now, I know the UK's departure from the European Union created complex challenges here in Northern Ireland. And I encourage the leaders of the UK and the EU to address the issues in a way that serve Northern Ireland's best interest. I deeply appreciate the personal leadership of Prime Minister Sunak and European Commissioner von der Leyen to reach an agreement. The Windsor Framework addresses the practical realities of Brexit and it's an essential step to ensuring hard-earned peace and progress of the Good Friday Agreements that they're preserved and strengthened. You know, the negotiators listened to business leaders across the UK and Ireland who shared what they needed to succeed. And I believe the stability and predictability offered by this framework will encourage greater investment in Northern Ireland, significant investment in Northern Ireland. I come from a little state where, the state of Delaware and back home, has more corporations that are registered in that state than every other state in the union combined. So I know a little bit about corporate attitudes. All the immense progress we see around us was built through conversation and compromise, discussion and debate, voting and inclusion. It's an incredible attestation to the power of democracy to deliver needs for all the people. And now I know better than most how hard democracy can be at times. We in the United States have firsthand experienced how fragile even long-standing democratic institutions can be. You saw what happened on January the 6th in my country. We learn anew with every generation that democracy needs champions. When I went to college, I was a political science major and history major. We used to every generation has to fight to preserve democracies. I didn't believe it at the time. I just thought it was automatic. We had this great democracy. What would we need to do? As a friend, I hope it's not too presumptuous of me to say that I believe democratic institutions established through the Good Friday Agreement remain critical to the future of Northern Ireland. The decision for you to make, not for me to make. But it seems to me they're related. An effective, devolved government that reflects the people of Northern Ireland and is accountable to them. A government that works to find ways through hard problems together is going to draw even greater opportunity in this region. I hope the Assembly and the Executive will soon be restored. That's a judgment for you to make, not me, but I hope it happens. Along with the institutions that facilitate North-South and East-West relations, all of which are vital pieces of the Good Friday Agreement. For in politics, no matter what divides us, if we look hard enough, there are always areas that are going to bring us together if we look hard enough. Standing for peace, rejecting political violence must be one of those things. So I want to once more recognize the way the leaders of Northern Ireland's major political parties come together in the wake of attempted murder of Detective Chief Inspector Caldwell to show that the enemies of peace will not prevail. Northern Ireland will not go back, pray God. The attack was a hard reminder that there will always be those who seek to destroy rather than rebuild. But the lesson of the Good Friday Agreement is this: in times when things seem fragile or easily broken, that is when hope and hard work are needed the most. That's when we must make our theme repair. Repair. And in Holy Easter season, this season, when all Christians celebrate renewal and life, the Good Friday Agreement showed us that there is hope for repair, even in the most awful breakages. You know, it helped people all around the world to hope for renewal and progress in their own lives. Most of all, allowed an entire generation of young people in Northern Ireland, across the UK and the Republic of Ireland, to grow up in a society mended by connection, made stronger by independence, interdependence, and respect. Young people like Gabrielle, who we just heard from earlier. Her success and her opportunities have been underwritten by the Good Friday Agreement. Young people like Jordan Graham, born less than 3 weeks after the agreement was signed in 1998. His whole life is unfolded under the wing of peace, which means not quite 25 years of age, he's been able to build an expertise in branding and marketing that he's used to help grow local businesses, support startups, consult for charities. Young people like Amy Clint, born in 2000, whose parents like to tell the story about how she came home from her first day of secondary school and asked, "What's the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic? What's the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic?" She didn't grow up thinking in sectarian divides. She grew up thinking about how she should support her beloved brother and other children with autism. Today, Amy's social enterprise has donated more than 5,000 copies of her book to schools across Northern Ireland to help children better understand autism and to learn to treat others with kindness and respect. That's the real power of the Good Friday Agreement. Compassion. Compassion. Changed how this entire region sees itself. In the words of Morrissey, Belfast's first poet laureate, "What's left is dark and quiet, but bookended by light, as when Dorothy opens the dull cabin door, and what happens outside is technicolor. What happens outside is technicolor." This place is transformed by peace, made technicolor by peace, made whole by peace. So today, I come to Belfast to pledge to all the people of Northern Ireland, the United States of America will continue to be your partner in building the future the young people of our world deserve. It matters to us, to Americans, and to me personally. Genuinely matters if you've traveled my country. So let's celebrate 25 extraordinary years by recommitting to renewal, repair, by making this exceptional peace the birthright of every child in Northern Ireland for all the days to come. That's what we should be doing. God willing, you'll be able to do it. Thank you all for listening, and may God bring you the peace we need. Thank you.
President Biden with that speech at Ulster University in its new £350 million hall and building. And referring there, of course, he said to 1991 when he visited, where a glass building like that, he said, would not have been or could not have been built, drawing the parallels, of course, with then 1994 when the ceasefire was declared, and then on to 1998 and the work of Senator George Mitchell, one of those the architects, of course, of the Good Friday Agreement. The President going on to say, in terms of political power sharing the way forward, the judgment for you to make, not for me, he said, but stand for peace, stand for the enemies of peace will not prevail. Northern Ireland will not go back, pray God, he said. When things seem fragile, that's when hope and hard work needed the most. Repair. And indicating also that the US had invested some $2 billion. Some of the major US corporations said, want you to come here, and peace and opportunity go together, and unprecedented economic opportunity. Let's speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's here, who's been listening to that as well. And we wonder if that's the carrot rather than the stick in terms of moving things forward, the indication that the US is prepared to put more money in if the peace accord is continued, if the Good Friday Agreement gets power sharing back on track.
Certainly, I think this was a well-pitched speech, and it was clear what this speech was trying to do, to not be controversial in any sense, but talk about the dividends of peace, in the words of President Biden. He, of course, speaking about the building in which he stood, how that wouldn't have been possible 20 or 30 years ago, but also talking about the cultural impact of Northern Ireland, the TV shows and movies that are made there that influence people all around the world, talking up Northern Ireland in a positive way. Perhaps that's the best way to reach out to the unionist community, certainly in the view of the American administration there. However, there is, of course, this overwhelming view within unionism in Northern Ireland that that was it. He stood there, he spoke for 10, 20 minutes, and now he's off to spend a good best part of 3 days in the Republic. He hasn't put as much time or perhaps as much effort into Northern Ireland as many would have liked to see.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that. The judgment is for you to make, not me. Indication, you know, they've got to get on with it. But clearly he's meeting a lot of people. He said he's here to listen. But the emphasis was very much on the young people and the promise, of course. And that's an interesting approach that he's taken. And I was just reflecting the fact that he did point out that he's met those 5 political leaders in Washington. One wonders what's been said in the interim, because, of course, he had a very short time with them here in Belfast. But have things been said and things been done behind the scenes?
Undoubtedly, there have been discussions behind the scenes. However, I would question the extent to which the President himself has been involved, the extent to which the President himself could even name the 5 leading political party leaders of Northern Ireland. I'm sure there were niceties said in the few minutes before this speech. Was there anything really in-depth or revelatory? I very much doubt it. I think the bigger point here is symbolism, is the backing of the Americans ready to get behind Northern Ireland that gets back on track with regard to power sharing and normalcy in government. That's the big promise.
Sort of quite a nice tease, the fact that Senator George Mitchell, who's, of course, one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, is going there in a few days, who's indicated.
Yeah, so he chaired the discussions in the late 1990s after he stepped down from the Senate. He I believe, was Senate Majority Leader for a time and then took on this big role at the behest of Bill Clinton. It's also telling that the current envoy to Northern Ireland from the United States of America
Joe Kennedy.
is a certain Joe Kennedy.
Now,
he's someone who stood for the Senate last year and couldn't win his primary against a left-wing Democrat in the state of Massachusetts. He was the first Kennedy to lose an election in the state of Massachusetts. So it perhaps shows how things have moved on.
Yeah, and of course the Kennedy connection. No, this is interesting because we're seeing there, of course, he name-checked, and this drew applause. Belfast barista termed Hollywood actor. Now, James Martin, of course, in the Oscar-winning movie An Irish Goodbye, and indicating, he said that he had his picture taken with him. I went home and bragged to my daughter. So it's still, a president who's got the common touch, even though, of course, questions being asked about his age, his ability to run for this second term, which he's again teased.
Yes, no, it is remarkable looking at the way that Biden speaks now compared to how he spoke even when he was vice president a decade ago, or when he was on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Senate back in the 1980s. There has been, to some extent, cognitive decline. I don't think that that's particularly controversial to say. He does speak a bit more slowly than he used to, but there is that certain touch that Biden has that clearly is able to incite something in Middle America, perhaps. He does have that common touch in the way that perhaps most professional politicians don't. He does know how to touch the buttons of the audience in a certain way. And the big argument, I suppose, with regard to looking at all of the different candidates who could get the nomination to become the Democrat nominee next time round, who is the person that could possibly unite what is a very fractured party? You've got the sort of squad side of things on the far left of the Democrats, and they seem to be making much more noise. And then you've got the more sort of centrist Democrats as well. Who is the person who can actually hold this whole thing together? There's a big argument for incumbency.
Yeah, and one does reflect that he has had a problem with a stammer from an early age, and part of his, some would say, rather deliberate speech-making and the delivery with hesitation is because he's trying to still overcome a stammer, which many people may not be aware of.
Absolutely. As a small boy, he did. And there was a fantastic moment in the 2020 election campaign when at one of his few events, he did relatively few events during the course of that campaign, but a small boy with a stammer came up to him, and there was a moment, a video that went viral on social media of the small boy speaking to Joe Biden getting down on his knees, talking to the boy, saying, I had the same problem as you, and this is how I did it, and you've just got to go. And that was a big, big moment, but particularly poignantly for where the president is now.
Yeah.
It was reading Irish poetry from the 20th century that helped Biden get over the stammer, helped him be able to deliver public speeches in the first place, even though he could do it a little bit better in the 80s than he can these days. But it was going through, memorising Irish poetry that he did repeatedly to get over that stammer. So that's a big connection that he has with the island of Ireland.
Indeed. Now, he doesn't seem to be in a hurry to leave. Of course, that was the reflection. He'd be dashing off to head over the border down to Dublin and the Republic, but he is taking time to talk to many here at Ulster University in this new building, the £350 million building, as he reflected, made of glass, and perhaps that would not have been the best material back in those days of 1991 when he was there last. Let's speak to Darren, who is in Belfast, as we hopefully stay with these pictures. Because, Darren, we also picked up some interesting observations that the president made at the beginning, talking about the fact that Biden was an English name or a British name. He had this book with this British naval character, Captain George Biden, even going on to say that he could trace his ancestry back to Huguenots and Nottingham. So maybe a bit of an oblique reference, his criticism of him being anti-UK or anti-British.
This was an attempt by Joe Biden in many ways, at least to reach out to the unionist community here, given the perception rightly or wrongly, amongst unionists, or some unionists in Northern Ireland, that he's kind of Irish Joe, if you like, that he is primarily more interested in kind of the nationalist argument than the unionists one. I think the more notable thing is that when he was with the Prime Minister a little earlier on, when reporters were asking him questions, he talked about how he needed to listen to politicians here, and that is a sign, I think, of trying to take the kind of DUP's attitude into his kind of scope, if you like. He did meet with those political leaders just before the speech, but as you and Tom have been talking about, it was a very, very brief moment. I think the United States, and Joe Biden in particular, feels that he cannot kind of do right here. I mean, there's been much criticism today that he's not spent much time in Northern Ireland, that he in essence hasn't interfered enough, and yet one feels that if he was to spend longer here and be a bit more muscular in his politics about trying to get Stormont restored and his support for the Windsor framework, he'd be regarded as being too interfering. That is a note about the United States foreign policy, it must be said, right across the world. So I think what he was trying to do was evoke the memory of the Good Friday Agreement, about how important it was and how transformative it has been for Northern Ireland. It's an acceptance right across the board. But at the same time, the two notable things I picked up from the speech were that he talked about the Windsor framework. Again, congratulated Rishi Sunak. That is something the Prime Minister will be relatively pleased with. But second of all, didn't focus on it too much, but clearly wanted to see Stormont back up and running again. Though that note that ultimately the end, that had to be a decision for politicians here. It's something that he could not force upon politicians. So as I say, an attempt to listen to the DUP, a recognition that not everyone's on the same page here, and an attempt also not to interfere too much.
Clue maybe in what the President was saying, and indeed what Rishi Sunak has been saying about the discussion he had with President Biden. The Prime Minister saying, we spoke in particular about the incredible economic opportunities that are there in store for Northern Ireland, and we talked about the investment potential is there, the companies that want to invest in Northern Ireland. Now, could this be an indication of the way forward as Washington sees it, this carrot of additional monies, additional investment, if they can get the political framework back up and running?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that at all. In fact, I was listening to a former Irish ambassador to Washington making the point last night that effectively the United States, the only other place outside of the United States, is making an argument for investment is here in Northern Ireland. Joe Biden, we have to remember, has become somewhat of a America First president, in the sense that he is creating all types of financial initiatives for companies to either remain in the US or to relocate back to the United States. But the one place he's willing to make an argument outside of the USA is here in Northern Ireland. There is an argument made by many, including businesses here, that Northern Ireland is in the best of all worlds. It's something Rishi Sunak has repeatedly said, that it is inside the EU single market and custom union, while at the same time having effectively unfettered access, to a large degree at least anyway, to the rest of the British single market. And yes, there is going to be a trade delegation to Northern Ireland later on this year. That is definitely a massive carrot to unionists to say, you know what, if you want an investment in this place, get Stormont back up and running again, get political stability back here in Northern Ireland, and you could well see the US dollars roll in. It is something that has been used time and time again by the United States over the last couple of decades to try and keep the peace process alive here. I think in the end, you know what, we're going to have to wait and see, but clearly unionists, and particularly the DUP, are holding out until these local elections in May, Mark, before they make their next move. They're uncertain about the political dynamic here. They're uncertain about if they do sign up to the Windsor framework, if they do get Stormont back up and running again, how that will go down, particularly with hardline unionists. So I'm not expecting to see any movement over the next month, but it'll be interesting post those elections, given the kind of political isolation the DUP now find themselves in, with essentially the Conservative Party backing the Windsor framework, and given the carrot approach by the US government talking about the investments of billions of dollars, and added to the frustration across the board here in Northern Ireland that there is no local Northern Ireland Assembly, that I think the DUP may well find themselves inching towards restoration, as I say, in the months ahead.
And of course, we'll see maybe what George Mitchell can do, the senator who is part of that Good Friday Agreement, who the President said would be on his way in a few days. But just to touch on the fact, Darren, that he's still talking to people. We got the indication perhaps this was going to be a pretty rapid visit. He'd talk and be on his way, but he's taking time to, as he said, listen.
Yeah, indeed. I have to say, though, his speech did start a little bit earlier than planned. He was due to talk at 1 o'clock and he walked onto his seat about just before 5:02. But he's not spending much time here. As soon as he's done, and this is his only official engagement here, I mean, there's not many people on the streets of Belfast today. I mean, a couple of thousand, I think, have gathered at various points throughout the city. But frankly, not to see very much. I mean, maybe to see the tail end of a motorcade. There are so many roads closed. He is not interacting with any of the public actually on the street. As I say, this was his only public engagement. A very deliberate attempt, I think, by the White House, yes, to mark the Good Friday Agreement's 25th anniversary, but at the same time, also to recognise that there is political instability here. Also, we have to remember Joe Biden is 80 years old. Whether he is abroad or at home, he does carry out far fewer public engagements than one would expect of a US president. But the focus of this trip will really commence in the next couple of hours when he travels down to the rest of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, the south of Ireland, whatever you want to call it. Well, first of all, he'll visit some ancestral, or one part of his ancestral homes in County Louth this afternoon before going to Dublin, where effectively he's going to get a state visit, if you like, addressing both houses of the Irish Parliament, meeting with the Irish President in Arrasanautharan, his official residence in the Phoenix Park, then also attending a banquet at Dublin Castle, before also going to Mayo, another part of his ancestral home, where he will actually meet with and talk to ordinary people, if you like, on Ireland's west coast. And every American president tries to make an effort to appeal to Irish Americans, but no more so than Joe Biden. This is a man who wears the shamrock, if you like, his Irish ancestry on his sleeve. And this is a visit he's been looking forward to for quite a long time, but it's a visit he's made many times. He came here quite a lot while he was vice president, and certainly as he was a US senator before that as well.
The speech indicating he can trace his ancestry back to the Huguenots and Nottingham, as he indicated. So perhaps batting back some of the observations from Arlene Foster a little earlier, of course. But for the moment, Darren, thank you for that. Let's now speak to author and broadcaster Eamon Malley, who also remembers those days of 1991 and then 1994 and, of course, 1998. Eamon, what do you think this will have done in terms of moving things forward? I mean, he did say the judgment is for you to make, not for me, but clearly he was indicating what may be available from the States if they can move the situation on politically.
Well, the first observation I would make is the following. I think that he has already shifted attitudes in the minds of some journalists from listening to the contributions so far. The bottom line is, and I think that the English listeners should be aware of this, the DUP, that's the Democratic Unionist Party, who is not contributing to the restoration currently of an assembly in Northern Ireland, is at war with Rishi Sunak. They're not at war with the President of the United States. They are rejecting the Sunak EU deal. That's the reality of life. Now, I think it's a very clever speech by President Biden. He's touched and pressed all the right buttons. I don't think anyone will be able to complain about this speech. Referencing his British heritage, his genealogy down the centuries is very significant. Building up the contribution of Protestants who left here several hundred years ago, 300-400 years ago, who contributed to building the political structures in America and realizing democracy was very clever. Reaching out to women and the Women's Coalition and all the women who made such a contribution to the Good Friday Agreement talks, very clever, very appropriate, and very, very encouraging. So I think it's a very clever speech, and it's well thought out, his sense of humor, and a small thing, even the reference, the recent attempt to kill that police officer in Omagh in County Tyrone. And he spoke of everyone who was killed left a hole in a heart. This is a man who feels, he understands pain, and he demonstrated it.
Yeah,
there was a moment when I was quite emotional, I have to say, and it's when he name-checked James Martin, whose father worked in the same building as I did for nearly 30 years. James, who won the Oscar. And what an accolade for that young man to be referenced, to be named by the President of the United States among his own family and with his friends here in Belfast. This speech, in my opinion, was a tour de force.
Yeah.
The president wasn't patronising, he wasn't condescending, he was reaching out the hand and the promise of more inward investment here. What more could he do? Now, I was very critical of the way this visit was handled. I felt that the President of the United States, deemed the most influential man in the Western world, was being accessed to Northern Ireland via the tradesman's entrance. One hour and a half was the time we were told he was going to spend on the campus of the university. Now, when other presidents came here, they went east, west, all over the city. East Belfast, the Protestant East Belfast, West Belfast, right across the city. I was told initially the plans were that he would go several places across the city. The security people from America, they were here, they checked out all the venues, etc., but it seemed to have been hollowed out at the end of the day. Now, there's an argument, it was because we don't have an administration here, we don't have a government, he couldn't go to Stormont and address the politicians. But there was something paltry about the whole approach. But this speech, in my opinion, will go worldwide, and I think it has redeemed what could have been a disaster here.
Okay, and interesting, he is still talking to people, he's not rushing off, and he is, from the pictures at least we can see, fairly relaxed about that. But I was just wondering what you take about the indication of the way forward, and that so much was talked about US major corporations wanting to come here, $2 billion investment already. Rishi Sunak, indeed, in his reflection on his talks with the President, about the incredible economic opportunities that are in store for Northern Ireland. I mean, could this be the carrot that's being waved in terms of telling everyone, look, get the political house back in order and the money will be there for you?
Yes, but you must realise that Joe Biden is a protectionist. His big thing has been about keeping industry at home. And it's very interesting that he's reaching out and telling us here in Northern Ireland particularly that America's there. He drew attention to $2 billion investment of American money in Northern Ireland. And he's certainly saying there's more. And that's quite against the flow of the philosophy which he had been promoting since becoming president, because he is quite protectionist towards jobs staying in America rather than traveling overseas. So I think it's very encouraging. But I'll come back to my main point here. The President of the United States is not the enemy of the Democratic Unionist Party. The enemy of the Democratic Unionist Party at the moment is Rishi Sunak, because he won the day in terms of the deal with the EU, in terms of the framework, the Windsor framework. And when the vote came to that issue in the House, there were only 29 people in the House opposing Rishi Sunak's deal. 6 of those were members of the Democratic Unionist Party, and 23 were other people, probably affiliated earlier with the ERG. So it's a significant, interesting speech, and I think it'll be very difficult for unionism to knock back this and not accept the open hand and the hand that he has reached out to all the community in Northern Ireland.
Eamon, thank you very much indeed for your assessment. As you say, what is now being recognised as obviously quite a significant speech there at Ulster University. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in Tom once more here in the studio, just to pick up on what Eamon was saying. That President Biden, of course, had also said he appreciated the personal leadership of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the European Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen to reach the agreement on the Windsor framework. The agreement, he says, offers stability and predictability and encourages greater investment in Northern Ireland. So clearly, you know, they are staying with that narrative. But one wonders what Sir Geoffrey Donaldson would now be making of this.
Yes, clearly there are... Let's not beat around the bush. The Windsor framework does deliver some really positive things for Northern Ireland. It delivers a dual regulatory regime that means some things that are illegal in the EU will be legal in Northern Ireland as well as in the rest of the United Kingdom. However, it also means that some EU law does apply in Northern Ireland. And I think that the way that it was presented at the start by Rishi Sunak and by a lot of those around him overhyped the positivity of this deal, and that led the DUP to think that, hang on, all of this presentation, to what extent have we been duped? There has been a great deal of obfuscation around the amount of EU control left in Northern Ireland, much more positive than what it was under the protocol, but still not that perfect world that the DUP wants to see.
And what would happen if they actually pressed that pedal called the Stormont brake? And clearly, as Eamon was saying, the ERG had questions over that as well within the Tory party itself. But just to sort of look forward now, I guess we're going to see a rather different complexion in terms of him following family roots, even though, as he said, it links back to Nottingham. And the whole indication of a US president wanting to big up these cultural links as JFK did all those years ago. And that plays well in Washington and elsewhere in the States.
It certainly does. Let's not forget that around 12% of Americans view themselves as Irish Americans. Now, whether that's genealogically true or whether that's people that quite like wearing a silly hat on St. Patrick's Day, we're not quite sure. But certainly it's a huge strength of feeling within America. Let's not forget that up to 6 million Irish men and women migrated across in the 19th century and early 20th century
including
to
John
the United
Dunlop,
States.
as President Biden indicated there, as signatory to the Constitution.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about that, actually, is the early Irish migration was actually Protestant. And a huge number, over 1 million Protestant Ulstermen moved across to the early United States, back when it was sort of, the Pilgrims and the rest of it, or maybe a little bit later than that. And then by the 1860s, you got a big wave of Catholic migration that then continued
into Boston.
And it's really interesting looking at what follows politically there. Talking up Ireland has always delivered political dividends for American presidents.
Just one other thought, and obviously we had the White House rejecting this assertion that President Biden was anti-British, and he certainly, indicated this book, as he said, Captain George Biden on the cover, a British naval officer, Biden being an English name, as he said.
Yes.
But how will this play back in the States? Because the question is, of course, now as to whether he will declare officially that he's going to run for this second term up against, maybe, who knows, a certain other individual who's facing court action.
Well, perhaps. It's interesting because Biden has always played off the role that he had internationally. In the 1980s, he chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate. Actually, at that time, really interesting piece of archive footage I dug up the other day, which might push back against this idea that he's entirely anti-British. In 1982, when the Reagan administration was equivocating over the Falklands conflict and didn't want to come down on either side, Biden, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, challenged Reagan's White House and said, no, we should come down firmly on the side of the British. They're our oldest and closest ally, and we should be supporting them against the fascists in Argentina. So Biden was very clearly on the British side of things in the Falklands conflict, perhaps more so even than Ronald Reagan was. But clearly he's always traded upon his international reputation. As vice president, he'd be gallivanting around the world representing the United States. And visits like this, where he seems like more of a statesman, where he's greeted with cheering crowds and all the rest of it, shaking as many hands as possible, that will undoubtedly play dividends for him in any upcoming election.
And he was talking about being a young senator back in 1972 and the whole issue. I mean, he touched even on January the 6th and democracy needs champions, sort of trying to feed into this message about how important it was to get politics back up and running in Northern Ireland. But clearly that's going to be maybe one of the approaches he's going to take in this presidential race for 2024.
Certainly, and it looks more and more likely that his opponent will actually be the same one as last time, not least because this court action that's been taken against Donald Trump seems to, in some ways, have backfired against those that brought it, or certainly against those Democrats that had been agitating for it.
Because they're pushing felonies rather than misdemeanours.
Firstly, it doesn't seem like it's the biggest crime in the world. Everyone knew that he had this affair, and the question is over tax technicalities and declarations within. It all gets very complicated, and to that extent, what it might have done is united a Republican base that may well have, up until this point, had half an eye on a guy called Ron DeSantis and thinking, well, he's doing a fairly good job down in Florida, where the economy's booming, where he's been consistently conservative in a way that Donald Trump hasn't always been. There was a big movement behind that. That train has slowed down somewhat as a result of this action against Donald Trump, this legal action, to some extent, this makes him seem like the guy that the establishment's trying to get after, and that might galvanise his base more. So really interesting dynamics there. If I were a betting person, I'd say that a rerun of the 2020 election is more likely than not. The same two candidates all over again.
Let's touch on a sensitive topic, and that is whether he will be physically or mentally capable of carrying that through in terms of a second term. He is 80 years old. He was indicating there, of course, that he has these lessons of history that he can carry through and refer back to previous days. But one wonders whether that is, in terms of the leader of the free world, whether that's going to be too much for him.
Well, he will be the oldest president in the history of the United States, were he to do a full second term. And similarly, let's not forget, Donald Trump is no spring chicken either. There seems to be an odd sense of sort of age leading. Age being the primary factor. Of course, it is in the Senate where you have seniority taking precedence. But let's not forget the short tenure of a man named William Henry Harrison, who became president in the 1840s, I believe. The story goes that he became president, he was the oldest president ever at the time, decided that he wanted to prove his youth and vitality by delivering the longest inaugural address in the history of the country. The weather was terrible. He caught pneumonia and died a few weeks later.
Well, there we are. There's a lesson to be learned. We've just got the live pictures now back with the pictures outside the Ulster University building, this new £350 million glass building, or at least glass largely in terms of the structure, something that President Biden reflected would not have been possible back in the 1990s when he last visited. I think 1991 he referred to that. But just to bring in this other aspect, of course, what we've been reporting on, and this is the discovery of these operational police notes last night, and it's been revealed this morning, 5 pages of what were termed sensitive notes in terms of police details, addresses, phone numbers, all the preparations for the streets being closed off, and indeed what to do for any vehicle threats. It's caused quite a stir. The Police Service of Northern Ireland indicating there had been a security breach that was being looked into. But we're obviously seeing now that what was put in place, I guess, by both the Secret Service and the PSNI together is not being derailed. There's no sense of panic at the moment, it seems.
No, everything seems to be very above board and there wasn't a big expectation that this would be the biggest risk sort of event. The bigger risks that were being spoken about in Northern Ireland are not in Belfast, but in other parts of the country where marches had been planned and the rest of it. Londonderry specifically, which of course is a much more nationalist hotspot than Belfast is. But it does seem that this event, this visit, has gone off relatively smoothly. Of course, taking into account we now know about documents being left on the side of the road, that is an unfortunate incident to happen. It doesn't seem to have derailed things, which no doubt the security services will be breathing a sigh of relief about.
Yeah, just to update people on that, and the Police Service in Northern Ireland have indicated we are aware of this security breach. The investigation's commenced. We've notified the Senior Information Risk Officer, and we take the safety of visiting dignitaries, members of the public, our officers and staff extremely seriously. However, we do believe that details such as phone numbers and addresses were actually on these 5 pages of what was basically the operational note passed to officers. I mean, it does seem extraordinary. That sort of level of detail was out there in the public domain and not on some sort of tablet or computer or hard drive instead.
Although perhaps safer to have something in a physical copy that can't be hacked into or tapped into. You just don't know what the considerations here are, but it does seem like this is one of those incidents that is less likely to be conspiracy and more likely to be sloppiness, laziness, cock up rather than conspiracy, as the phrase goes, if we can use those words at this time on a Wednesday afternoon. There we are. But it does seem to be that what might have happened here is someone just sort of left them in a careless moment when they should have disposed of them properly. But it doesn't seem to have got in the wrong hands. It doesn't seem to, at this stage, have upset things.
Yeah, just a few indications just to update you on the situation there on the streets of Belfast. Some protesters, we've been told, protest leaflets, waving banners, and indications about long-standing issues, and no to NATO, the Irish tricolour flag, and a few other points being made, but no widespread demonstrations, no indications of any kind of violent reactions to this presidential visit. And clearly what they are looking at is the route now that will be taken. He's going to go across the border down to Dublin and County Mayo. And that then becomes, of course, the issue for the Irish Garda rather than the police service for Northern Ireland.
It certainly does. And
American Secret Service agents now coming out of the building. We can see... well, not so secret. They're pretty obvious, aren't they, really?
They really are. It is a much shorter convoy than President Biden is used to here in Northern Ireland. In the United States, the convoy of cars can go anywhere between 70 and 100, even for short journeys across from, for example, helipads in New York across to the UN. There is often a huge convoy. This is something a lot more modest that Biden is perhaps not particularly used to.
But we've got, I think, the beast, as they've called it, is there, the bomb-proof presidential limousine.
Bulletproof windows, bomb-proof exterior, indeed hermetically sealed in case of chemical attacks. Yeah. This is a real piece of kit that once, on the street of Downing Street, got stuck because its turning circle is not small enough.
Indeed, they couldn't get it turned around, indeed. And obviously the other indication is that there is a very large presence in terms of the military at Aldeburgh, RF Aldeburgh, where Air Force One landed, including the Marine helicopters, of course. I'm not sure whether that... I think Marine One is whatever helicopter...
In the same way that Air Force One is whatever plane the president is on of those. I think there are two of the large class ones. We do have some words in from Downing Street now.
Right, yeah.
Following the meeting between Biden and the Prime Minister. Downing Street have said that the Prime Minister thanked President Biden for the role the US people and businesses have played in Northern Ireland's prosperity. Due to that investments, tens of thousands of jobs, etc. The Prime Minister and President Biden, so say number 10, both expressed their sincere hope that the institutions of Northern Ireland will be restored as soon as possible. But they moved on to wider discussions as well, not just focusing on Northern Ireland. The Prime Minister and the President agreed that manipulation of global markets by authoritarian leaders demonstrates more than ever the need for like-minded partners to work together. They spoke about the G7 summit coming up next month and the Prime Minister visiting DC in June.
Yeah, what they call the wider relationship between the UK and US. So maybe it wasn't just a cup of tea that they shared there, but a more substantive discussion. For the moment, Tom, thank you. We'll just keep these pictures up. Let's bring in now Professor Anthony Glees, security expert at the University of Buckingham. Thank you for joining us, Anthony, once more. Just to touch on this extraordinary story about these 5 pages of the operational notes that basically were revealing police service in Northern Ireland addresses and phone numbers. Not great timing.
No, it's very unfortunate. I mean, there were 2 things that we were worried about here. The first was that somebody might try and dash towards the president when he was in Northern Ireland. The second, that there would be trouble outside of Belfast, particularly in Derry, which would embarrass us in Britain and also undermine the argument that Northern Ireland is now safe and secure after 25 years of the peace process. What we didn't predict was that the security problems would come from the Northern Ireland Police Service itself, because that's what seems to be the case. And it is embarrassing. There's no doubt about it. This is about security. The bottom line of this visit is about the security of Northern Ireland, that it's a safe place for people to invest. And yet it looks as if somebody was sloppy. As long as the president is in British territory, I think we still have to hold our breath a bit, but it seems to be going off well. But it does not look good. If you think of all the 300 cops that have been drafted into Northern Ireland. You think of the 400 secret servicemen who surround him. You think of all the guns, all the efforts that we're taking to keep it safe. One bit of sloppiness is a bit of a blur on the landscape.
We just got we just talked about the beast with Tom. The US presidential vehicle is just coming around. The huge stretch Cadillac, as Tom was saying, bomb-proof, bulletproof and gas-proof as well. But Anthony, we're just wondering, who is actually running the show? Is it this American Secret Service detail, or is it the Police Service of Northern Ireland?
Well, I certainly think it is the US Secret Service that will have marked out and staked out every single inch that President Biden would be walking, be seen. And I should think that a very large number of the people milling around the president will also be US Secret Service agents. We will have supplied all the intelligence that we could get, GCHQ from MI5, of course, very active in Northern Ireland. But it's clear that the shots are called by the US Secret Service and not by our own people. However, we have to come back to this. It is an embarrassment. This is about security, and at a very basic level, we have shown that we're not properly competent. That's how, that's the reality of it. And it is most unfortunate. Of course, we've also got, Biden's got his own problems with security because of the Putin's mole in the Pentagon, who's leaked all of the secret documents that we're talking about. Nobody can be smug about security, not ever. But this was the big one. God willing, it will go off okay. I certainly don't want to be a skunk at this picnic. But this should not have happened. And certainly, I think there will be a lot of explaining to do by the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
Yeah, the end of the convoy now just going out of view with the police outriders. But one just also reflects that President Biden, of course, reflected on John Corwell's shooting in Omagh, off-duty police officer. As far as we're aware, the 5-page document that was discovered containing information such as officer contact details as well as the road closures. I mean, this beggars belief so soon after clearly a dissident Republican attack on a police officer.
Well, it does. I mean, it does beg a belief. As I say, it is a real embarrassment. I mean, I think people will say, as this tour to Northern Ireland comes to an end, people will say, what did it really represent? Did they want to get President Biden in and out of there as quickly as possible because they do not believe that Northern Ireland is as secure at the moment as it should be? That would be very damaging to us here, because the whole argument is you can come and invest now in Northern Ireland because the troubles are over. Clearly, they're malicious and highly dangerous people in Northern Ireland, and it is God willing, nothing will happen because of them. And it is also to be earnestly hoped that they will heed the message of the president and heed the message of the prime minister and get back to power sharing in Stormont. But if that doesn't happen, if their tempers continue to simmer, if anger continues to be there, then I think the situation is bleak and could very quickly look entirely different. What we have at the moment is not a stable situation, and at a stroke, it could be blown to the four winds. I hope not, but it's possible.
Yeah, and certainly the president indicating, of course, how fragile that process was and the importance. So thank you very much indeed for bringing us your assessment. That motorcade now having left the University of Ulster in Belfast, and no alert as such. And clearly the beast, as it's called, is now on its way towards the border, and the president heading down to Dublin, and County Mayor will update you, of course, on the rest of that presidential visit. But a safe departure from Belfast. More coming up in this next hour of GB News Live. Let's get an update now on all the headlines as it comes up to 1 o'clock. Here's Bethany with the latest.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 2 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. US President Joe Biden has urged for a return to power sharing in Northern Ireland. After meeting with the Prime Minister in Belfast this morning, the President made a keynote speech at Ulster University. He highlighted the significance of the Good Friday Agreement and praised the Windsor Framework, saying it addresses the practical realities of Brexit. Mr Biden stressed the need for a recommittal to peace and the restoration of power sharing at Stormont.
Sometimes, especially when the distance of history, we forget how hard-earned, how astounding that peace was at the moment. It shifted the political gravity in our world. There were no guarantees that the deal on paper would hold, no guarantees that it would be able to deliver the progress we celebrate today. It took long, hard years of work to get to this place. It took a people willing to come together in good faith and to risk boldly for the future.
Meanwhile, police in Northern Ireland have acknowledged a potential major security breach involving President Biden's visit. The PSNI is investigating after a resident reportedly discovered a list of officers' names detailed to the president's protection. Joe Biden's 4-day trip to Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic has seen 300 officers drafted in from the rest of the UK to bolster his security. The risks of this potential breach are yet unknown, but we'll bring you more on it when we get it. The Scottish Government is planning to launch a legal challenge against Westminster's decision to veto the gender recognition reforms. Scotland's Social Justice Secretary says the bill was passed by an overwhelming majority in Holyrood, with support from all parties. Shirley Ann Somerville warned the British government's use of Section 35 risks setting a dangerous constitutional precedent over what she said were devolved matters. But Rishi Sunak defended the move, saying he has concerns over its impact on women's safety.
It was a decision that we made after taking very careful and considered advice, and we had concerns, as the UK Government Secretary of State set this out at the time, concerns about how Scotland's Gender Recognition Act would interact with reserve powers, about the operation of the Equalities Act, the protection of women elsewhere in the UK as well, and that's why we took the decision to block the GRR, and obviously if there's a court process, we will follow that through.
Doctors' leaders have held talks with the conciliation service ACAS, which says it's well prepared and ready to help in the ongoing pay dispute with the government. Thousands of junior doctors with the British Medical Association in England are walking out for the second in a 4-day strike this week. The BMA said they need help to broker realistic talks after Downing Street refused to negotiate unless they abandoned the 35% pay rise demand. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is urging the government to end the industrial action.
I don't think 35% is affordable, but I do think that the role of government is to get in the room, around the table, and to negotiate a settlement. And for very many people whose operations are going to be cancelled, that's exactly what they want the government to do. So yes, I think 35% is unaffordable, but that's not an excuse to sit on your hands and do nothing. That's a reason to get in the room and negotiate, and that's what the government should be doing.
The Ministry of Defence says there is a serious level of inaccuracy in allegedly leaked documents which claim UK Special Forces have operated in Ukraine. Reports suggest that as many as 50 personnel have been deployed alongside other Western forces, although the locations and missions have not been revealed. The classified US documents may have been released on the chat room of the social media platform Discord. The MOD is warning there's a risk of disinformation. The cost of childcare in the UK is forcing 1 in 4 parents to either give up their job or drop out of education. A new study by the global children's charity Their World has found 74% of parents say they find it difficult to meet childcare costs. It's calling on governments to urgently prioritise spending on early years programmes. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's just update you with the latest we're getting from Belfast. We saw the US presidential motorcade with the so-called Beast, the bomb-proof, bulletproof and gas-proof car, the limousine. We are being told now that Joe Biden will no longer be travelling by helicopter to County Louth in the Republic because of the bad weather conditions. This just coming through from Irish government officials. So he will travel to his first set of engagements in the Republic via that motorcade. That's just coming in. Indication as to why perhaps we had all those vehicles following him. It's the full White House panoply on its way. Meanwhile, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Heaton-Harris, saying that Rishi Sunak had not snubbed the US president by not attending that address at the Ulster University. He told reporters in the past few minutes they had a bilateral meeting this morning. The Prime Minister's got other private engagements that he has gone to. Well, let's speak to our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, who's been following all these events in Belfast. Well, it's the streets have emptied a little in the past few minutes, Doogie, as the sort of circus moves on to the Republic.
Well, it has, and the Republic of Ireland are about to get that security headache heading down towards them with everything that it brings. It has been very disruptive to Belfast, but as we've seen, he is the American president, and Belfast, for all the size of this city, for all the size of Northern Ireland, with 1.8 million people in it, have hosted many American presidents, probably more so than most other countries per capita. And this speech today that he made was quite measured, especially when he referred to the Ulster Scots. He was very much reaching out towards the Protestant community, the Unionist community. And you've got to remember that not all Catholics are nationalists and not all Protestants are Unionists. That is a mistake that many people and many commentators have made. In fact, in any polls lately, it's in around 70% of Northern Ireland prefer being in the Union. So that would mean, of course, that a substantial number of those people have to be Catholic or other, because Union or Protestants are no longer in the majority as such inside Northern Ireland. So he was very measured in his speech, but he also was putting a bit of pressure on the DUP and Unionists themselves to go back into power with the carrot and stick approach, as you call it, saying there is money here. But of course, there's no minutiae, no examples of how that can happen with inside the framework document, with what we're hearing about state aid and about goods coming from the UK and red lanes and green lanes. None of that has been absolutely defined. In fact, hauliers in Northern Ireland are really pressing hard now to have a definition on what is in red and green lanes and how those products get into Northern Ireland. So the likes of manufacturing and so forth would be very upset by that. But it was a good day for him. He talked about the glass building that did make me laugh because, of course, he was perfectly correct in what he said. Very few buildings in Northern Ireland, even now, if you drive around it, have big, massive windows in it. And that hails back to those 80s and 60s and 70s when there was real trouble here. But he has left Northern Ireland, I think, in a better position than he started. Unionists will appreciate that he has put the hand out, but I think they will still be wary of taking it.
Yeah, interesting that he was pulling all these sort of historical references out. John Dunlop, of course, the signatory to the Constitution and the importance of that. But just to touch on the link being made by both Rishi Sunak and President Biden with this prosperity for Northern Ireland, the billions of pounds of investment creating tens of thousands of jobs, and the indication how important, therefore, it was to get the political process moving forward to free that up.
Everybody in Northern Ireland would love that. That was talked about during the peace dividend of Northern Ireland in 1998. But of course, in that period of time, there was a much bigger police force in Northern Ireland. They were very well paid because of the danger that was there. There was substantially more army bases. This place had thousands of British Army soldiers here, which all contributed to the economy. And of course, when the Good Friday Agreement came along, that police force was taken to a smaller force, and of course many of the jobs then, so as there wouldn't be a sudden lull on the economy, were put into the public sector. About 72% of the jobs in Northern Ireland depend on that public purse, and over the years they were meant to have went into the private sector and declined, and of course that hadn't happened and hasn't happened now because Stormont continually, it's very, very clunky in how it operates. If anything, it's got larger. So that peace dividend, it didn't really appear then, and people here now are really wondering, will it appear this time? I think people more are wanting to know more about how goods are going to move in and out of Northern Ireland rather than what goods are going to be produced here.
Yeah, and just one quick thought then, Dougie, as well. He was referring to the fact that George Mitchell, Senator George Mitchell, of course, one of the architects of that Good Friday Agreement, he's due there in a couple of days.
Well, he is. He's due here on Monday. He is one of the few bridges, actually, of foreign diplomats in Northern Ireland that is greatly welcomed by both communities. I think both communities here really appreciate the time that he did spend. And in fact, many a press conference I sat and looked at him and thought, how on earth could you be bothered with us? It was like children bickering at one stage. And outside the Stormont Hotel, where he used to hold those press conferences, you could see sometimes he was absolutely exhausted, mentally exhausted at the talks that he had to take. So he did, and he still does hold a lot of respect in Northern Ireland amongst both nationalist and unionist communities, and he will be very well welcomed here on Monday.
Yeah. As the President reflected, 700 days of failure, but 1 day of success, of course. So, Dougie, for the moment, thank you for that, but let's remind ourselves now what the President had to say on the political situation in Northern Ireland.
The Windsor Framework addresses the practical realities of Brexit and it's an essential step to ensuring hard-earned peace and progress of the Good Friday agreements that they're preserved and strengthened. I hope the Assembly and the Executive will soon be restored. That's a judgment for you to make, not me, but I hope it happens. Along with the institutions that facilitate North-South and East-West relations, all of which are vital pieces of the Good Friday Agreement.
That was the President speaking at Ulster University. A little earlier, of course, he met Rishi Sunak at the hotel nearby for bilateral talks, and the Prime Minister spoke to reporters after that meeting.
You know, it was great to welcome President Biden to the UK for, I think, the fourth time since he's become president, but particularly to a part of the UK that is very special and dear to him. It also reminds us of the contribution that America made to the peace process as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And President Biden and I spoke a lot about that, and we spoke in particular about the incredible economic opportunities that are there in store for Northern Ireland. And we talked about the investment potential that is there, the companies that want to invest in Northern Ireland. I think that's incredibly exciting. It will bring growth, jobs and prosperity to Northern Ireland. And I know he shares my ambition to see the institutions here back up and running. That's what people and businesses in Northern Ireland deserve.
You're the British Prime Minister. Why aren't we seeing more of you and him standing together, speaking together, not even going to his speech? Has this trip really been worth it for you?
Well, it's the fourth time that President Biden has visited the UK since he's become president, and he and I had a very good discussion today about a range of issues, economic investment in Northern Ireland, but also a range of foreign policy issues, the importance of economic security, and that comes on the back of a meeting I had with him last month in the US. I'm seeing him again next month at the G7, and then I'm going to Washington in June. That we're very close partners and allies. We cooperate and talk on a range of things, whether that's supporting Ukraine or, as I said, economic security. I think actually the relationship is in great shape, and the President and I have lots that we're working on together.
That was Prime Minister speaking a little earlier. Let's bring you a small reaction because Sinn Féin's leader in Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, has described the visit as being one of momentum. This is about cementing the relationship that we have between Ireland and the United States. I think today's message has been very clear around peace, stability, prosperity, opportunity. It's very much forward-looking and young people focused. Well, let's get the reflections of our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, of course, who followed this speech at the university. And Darren, it's interesting. We were told this was going to be a fairly rapid visit there, but he did take this time after his speech to talk to people and, as he'd indicated earlier, to listen as well.
Yeah, and I think that was a very deliberate attempt by the White House to kind of step back a little bit, to take on some of the criticism, clearly from the unionist community here in Northern Ireland. We heard this most vocally from one of our own GB News presenters and former First Minister Arlene Foster, who felt that Joe Biden was anti-British. There were, at certain points during the speech, off script it must be said, where Joe Biden felt the need to address that, talking about actually how he's got British heritage and not just Irish heritage. We heard it in his remarks to the Prime Minister a little earlier on today as well, in which he said that he would listen to what people had to say here, maybe a recognition that he needs to be more understanding of the unionist position. So I think in many ways this is a very carefully worded speech that kind of tried to strike a balance line between that hope and optimism that has flowed from the Good Friday Agreement, the want and desire to see Stormont up and running again, but crucially saying that that is a judgment for people here. It is not something the United States is kind of muscle in on. And as I was suggesting to you earlier on a little bit, Mark, Joe Biden and the US always find themselves in a difficult position when it comes to these things. He's been criticised for not spending very long here, or not getting terribly politically involved, not spending an awful lot of time with the political leaders. And yet, if it was the other way around, where he was spending lots of time here and being quite politically muscular and trying to kind of force the hand of the DUP, you'd be seen as interfering. So it was trying to walk that very fine line between both those sides.
Yeah, and of course Tony Blair warning him about the dangers in doing that, about saying the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong people or the right people. But just to pick up on the interview we had there with the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Heaton-Harris, has had to go public saying that Rishi Sunak had not snubbed the President by not attending that address at the Ulster University. I mean, there were people wondering why wasn't the Prime Minister in the front row there?
Yeah, very strange. And actually, I must get to the bottom of what's gone on here. I mean, the Prime Minister's made quite a lot of effort over the last 24 hours or so to spend time with President Biden. He met him off Air Force One last night. We know he met him this morning for pretty brief talks all in all, but actually in the end, quite important ones, because there is little doubt Downing Street is trying to build up a rapport with President Biden, try and mend some of those kind of strained relations with the White House we've seen in recent years. Now, maybe the Prime Minister's had engagement elsewhere in the UK today that he couldn't miss, but a little strange that he wasn't in the room for that speech. But be in no doubt that it is clear the Prime Minister is, as I say, trying and sew back that kind of discord that we've seen in regards to relations between the US and the UK, insisting they're pretty good, that Joe Biden's visited the UK 4 times since he became president. Clearly there's been quite a lot of concern and a bit of outrage about the fact that he's decided not to go to the King's coronation next month. But let's not forget, Joe Biden is going to come on a state visit at some point over the next 2 years, and also that Rishi Sunak has been invited to the White House in June.
OK, Darren, thank you for that. But let's pour a little bit of cold water on all this, because Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, has just reacted to the visit, saying it's not changed the political dynamic in the power-sharing impasse. He said, I had a brief conversation with the President. He made clear that it's not his job, as we heard in his speech, to take decisions for political leaders in Northern Ireland. Sir Geoffrey going on to say, this doesn't change the political dynamic in Northern Ireland. We know what needs to happen. I'll be meeting my team over the next few days, and we'll be going back to the UK government. We believe the government needs to go further in terms of protecting Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and our ability to trade within the UK internal market. That's what needs to happen now to enable us to move forward towards the restoration of the political institutions. So that's the reaction from the DUP. But let's now speak to reflect actually what Joe Biden is saying. I come to Belfast to pledge for all the people in Northern Ireland that the United States of America will continue to be your partner in building the future the young people of our world deserve. He said it matters to us Americans, and to me personally, it genuinely matters. Well, let's speak now to someone in the United States, indeed Democratic Party strategist Joel Rubin joining us. Joel, thank you for your time. We remember, of course, the political dividends that President Clinton enjoyed after bringing about the Good Friday Agreement. Does the Biden White House see that as something they're trying to recreate?
Well, Mike, it's great to be with you. And peace in Northern Ireland is very popular in the United States. We have a major Irish-American constituency in the United States, tens of millions. President Biden, as you see, is personally invested in this. Sarah Mitchell, who was his leader in the Senate in the 90s, clearly invested. Joe Kennedy behind the president in these photos, our point person to Northern Ireland. So this is a true American commitment. And I think it's very politically popular for the president. And it's also good policy, ensuring that this Brexit transition, however it comes out, does not disrupt the transatlantic alliance, does not disrupt American-British relations, maintains tight ties between the U.S. and Ireland. And I think that's why the president continues to do these visits and these engagements and really making it personal this time.
Yeah, and of course we've got the indication, no official recognition of the 2024 presidential run, but clearly when he was talking at that Easter egg roll, no less, at the White House, indicating, yes, he's going to go for 2024, this will play quite well with that.
Yeah, it's only going to be a positive for him. This is one of the smartest politicians we've seen, certainly in my lifetime, 50 plus years of being elected to the highest levels of the United States. And he gets it. And Irish voters, interestingly, are spread across some of the key swing states in the Midwest. And that matters. Margins matter, and they can be very close. And those are states that the president needs to carry in 2024. And so he is already in full campaign mode. These international trips are never divorced from domestic constituencies that have political impact here in the United States.
So what will be more important then? Actually achieving some kind of movement in North Ireland in terms of Stormont and the Good Friday Agreement and the power sharing being moved forward and back in place? Or is it the fact that he'll be pictured trying to follow his family roots down in the Republic, in Ireland itself, and maybe having a glass of Guinness in the pub and so on?
Well, the photo ops don't hurt, but it's really not enough. Clearly, this president, when he came into office, he talked about restoring American global leadership, working multilaterally. We see that as part of his consistent messaging regarding the war in Ukraine, and that's the policy of the White House. So getting the deal moving forward in a positive direction is crucial for Democrats. It's been a red line, frankly, on a bipartisan level in the Congress. Really no movement will occur on a free trade agreement between the U.S. and the U.K. if the GFA falls to the side. So from a long-term policy position, the president wants to continue to nudge it to closure. And I think this fits as well into his ability to argue that he can advance American interests, maintain our relationships through aggressive diplomacy, as he's showing with this visit.
Yeah, it's interesting. People were picking up also in this speech at Ulster University. He was referring back to Captain George Biden, this naval officer, on the front of a book, saying Biden's an English name, then talking about links to the Huguenots and Nottingham. Has he been stung, or has the White House been stung by this charge that he's seen as anti-British?
I think it would be pretty clear to anyone watching that Joe Biden is very strongly committed to the American-British relationship. So surprise, concern, perhaps those kinds of charges, but there's a decades-long track record, including what your prime minister said. These multiple visits, state visits coming up. There's just too much evidence to demonstrate that's pretty much rubbish.
Okay.
Technically speaking.
Yeah. And just one thought before you go, Joel. If he does actually declare officially he's going for this second term, what is the view there within the Democrat Party power base, bearing in mind his age and all these discussions about his cognitive abilities and so on?
Yeah, there's no concern about that. Those are messages that keep on getting pushed by former President Trump, who tried to resurrect them again yesterday. But we all remember he was doing that in 2020 and got on a debate stage with Joe Biden and got destroyed in that debate. So President Biden's strong. He's had a very effective 2+ years now in the White House, restored American credibility abroad. He's rejuvenated our economy, passed trillions of dollars in effective new spending for the future. The base constituencies are excited about him. And that's really what's going to matter. And the last thing I'll mention, the other side is not offering solutions for the future, and it's going the opposite direction on women's right to choose, on the climate, on immigration, on the economy, on so many issues that really Democrats coming home in this 2024 election is what's going to keep Joe Biden in the White House.
OK, Sleepy Joe, wide awake for 2024. Joel, thank you very much indeed for your time there in the States. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, of course, second day of action by junior doctors. ACAS now saying it's got a role to play. Could they actually intervene? We'll be looking at that in a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Jules and Curve. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith.
Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's just update you on the situation with the junior doctors' strike, British Medical Association. The BMA is just saying it's now revoked its permission for doctors to leave the picket line at Western General Hospital down in Somerset. Now, contingency plans had meant that hospital leaders could request for those doctors to return to work for a limited time in certain circumstances to maintain safe patient care, as they said. Now, the BMA had indicated 7 junior doctors could return to work down at Weston-super-Mare to help the hospital's emergency department. In an update now, it says, we've revoked that derogation granted. It's become apparent both the BMA and NHS England were misled over the level of staffing cover. So clearly difficulties there at that general hospital in Somerset. But meanwhile, the Conciliation Service, ACAS, says it's ready to help end the dispute. The 2 parties, of course, remaining at loggerheads with day 2, this 96-hour stoppage by junior doctors. But the BMA says that something does need to be done to start brokering what it said were realistic talks. Let's speak now to our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's outside St Thomas's Hospital in London. And Catherine, ACAS indicating both sides need to agree to any kind of tabling of talks. And certainly the government's indicating it's not going to play ball as long as this 35% pay rises on the table.
Yes, so far both the BMA and the government have been taking a very, very hard line. But certainly it's emerged today that the BMA has been talking to ACAS. They are saying, of course, ACAS are saying that they are ready to help to get involved, to get talks underway, because currently the government, I was at a Downing Street briefing yesterday, the government was saying very clearly, we are not going to talk to you until you A, drop the 35% pay demand, and B, also call the strikes off. Well, there seems to be zero prospect of that happening, because the BMA are adamant that they need a big pay rise, that doctors have not been treated like they should be, that wages are down about 25% over 13 years ago. So both sides really entrenched. Of course, the last doctors' strike a few years ago, ACAS did eventually need to get involved and took about 10 days to bring a resolution. But in the meantime, real concerns about patient safety, because of course some 47,000 junior doctors walking out. Apologies, we're battling with the storm here. And some 300,000 operations and procedures expected to be cancelled. So real concerns about the impact that this is having on patients, and certainly no end in sight at the moment.
Indeed. Well, as we can see by your umbrella, if we bring you back in shot, Storm Noah does appear to have arrived. I hate to tell you, but the weather forecast is 70-mile-per-hour gusts being predicted. So I think you better hold on to that before you disappear a la Mary Poppins. But for the moment, thanks for updating us there at St Thomas's Hospital. More coming up in terms of that wind. Just to tell you, a yellow weather warning now for wind being extended to the southeast of England. The storm predicted to migrate there over the course of the day, and heavy outbreaks of rain and thunder in the southeast of England by tonight, say the forecasters. Batten down the hatches. Let's get an update now on all the headlines with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Here's your latest headlines from the GB newsroom at 2:31. US President Joe Biden has urged for a return to power sharing in Northern Ireland. After meeting with the Prime Minister in Belfast, the President made a keynote speech at Ulster University. He highlighted the significance of the Good Friday Agreement and praised the Windsor Framework, saying it addresses the practical realities of Brexit. Mr Biden stressed the need for a recommittal to peace and the restoration of power sharing at Stormont.
Sometimes, especially when the distance of history, we forget how hard-earned, how astounding that peace was at the moment. It shifted the political gravity in our world. There were no guarantees that the deal on paper would hold, no guarantees that it would be able to deliver the progress we celebrate today. It took long, hard years of work to get to this place. It took a people willing to come together in good faith and to risk boldly for the future.
The Scottish Government is planning to launch a legal challenge against Westminster's decision to veto the gender recognition reforms. Scotland's Social Justice Secretary says the bill was passed by an overwhelming majority in Holyrood, with support from all parties. Shirley Ann Somerville warned the British government's use of Section 35 risks setting a dangerous constitutional precedent over what she says are devolved matters. Rishi Sunak defended the move, saying he has concerns over its impact on women's safety. Doctors' leaders have held talks with the conciliation service ACAS, which says it's well prepared and ready to help in the ongoing pay dispute with the government. Thousands of junior doctors with the British Medical Association in England are walking out for the second in a 4-day strike this week. The BMA said they need help to broker realistic talks after Downing Street refused to negotiate unless they abandon the 35% pay rise demand. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2447 and 1.1348 euros. The price of gold is £1,623.75 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,843 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jules and Curve.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jules and Curve. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the UK has up to 50 special forces operating in Ukraine, according to a series of US top-secret documents leaked online. Those files also mentioning the deployment of US and French special forces in the country. Well, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said the government was investigating the source of that leak.
Take this very seriously, and we will continue to investigate and turn over every rock until we find the source of this and the extent of it.
Well, here the Ministry of Defence said that readers should be cautious about taking at face value allegations that have the potential to spread disinformation. Well, joining us now is Defence Editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Robert, disinformation or leaked information?
Both. I think it's been leaked, and there are pretty good signs, Mark, now that this has been doctored. We know that the casualty figures have been doctored, if I can put it like this, in favour of the Russians, reducing the casualty figures recorded for the Russians, slightly enhancing them from what we understand from other sources on the side of the Ukrainians. And that means that the Russian disinformation organisms, which we know very well. Actually, they were set up by Mr. Prigozhin, famously the founder of the Wagner Group as well. So we're not only in an information leak war, we're in a propaganda war here.
Yeah, and one reflects maybe that the story would have been if we didn't have special forces operating in Ukraine, given the amount of kit and expertise that's needed out there.
I would be amazed, and I have to say frankly, and I don't want to dwell on this, I think that it's probably an underestimate, because I think that there has been a lot of hands-on assistance by the UK. They have been trainers in Ukraine for decades, almost since the Partnership for Peace programme was started by NATO in the 1990s. So they go in and out, they will know people, and the SAS are there not only to help the Ukrainians, but they're there to help the British government, the British Army, and the British Ministry of Defence to find out what goes on, what really works in this kind of warfare, and what has been exaggerated. I'm afraid to say, from other very interesting analysis that's coming out, probably we may have overestimated the effectiveness of the rocket system from the Americans, HIMARS, for example.
And what about the way forward? Because we had great play about the Leopard 2 tanks going out, the Challenger tanks, the armour and so on, and other artillery systems. We still haven't seen what was feared to be a Russian spring offensive of, the various Russian tanks rolling across.
On neither side have we seen a spring offensive. This is this other really key piece of analysis done from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, one of the three main think tanks in London, a very, very good study by actually two German experts, and said, for all that we're talking about tanks and so forth, most of this has been ground out on the ground, if I can put it like that, between artillery and lots of fighting men. And it's mostly men crossing open ground against very difficult defenses. It's numbers of infantry and diminishing numbers of artillery. But on the other hand, it seems that the artillery is improving more on the Ukrainian side than it is on the Russian side at the moment.
Where does that leave us? Because, of course, one reflects that Russia won the battle against the Germans by having the Russians having more boots on the ground, and clearly that's still the situation, even though the Ukrainians are becoming more expert.
The famous Ivans. The thing is that initially, against expectations, effectively, the Ukrainians could call more effective troops into the battle line. You're right that Russia is trying to generate more forces, but it doesn't seem to be going so well. They're asking for, in inverted commas, 400,000 volunteers rather than go for an all-out ordered mobilization and martial law. So watch that space. The fact is that what these documents have proved, rather sadly, is that NATO, EU, the allies that are supporting Ukraine need a more coherent strategy. It's a strategy that evolves over time. This is what we need to do immediately. This is what we must plan for the later in the year. And this is what we must be looking out for contingencies if things go wrong in Crimea, whatever you know about. There is not that coherence. The last point is, of course, this leak. It is very upsetting for all concerned, particularly for the Ukrainians, because it's robbed them of surprise.
Yeah. And what do they think is going on? Is it some kind of master spy? Or I think some suggestions, it may even be some kind of social media platform used by gamers.
Absolutely. That's what it's looking. It's the old nightmare, isn't it, Mark, of the nerd, the anorak kid in his garret, in his bedroom, playing game and hacking into it. Because one thing that Bellingcat has even suggested, a very interesting freelance surveillance company, which has very good track record, particularly on the Skripal case in Salisbury, you may remember, that they do think it's gamers, and they've spotted that this has been actually going on since January, and we're only hearing about it now.
Right, so there may be more to come through the pipeline, but clearly a worry, yes, for all the intelligence chiefs. But Robert, as ever, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction to that, and we'll keep you updated, of course, as we get more. But let's now talk about the Chancellor, who's in Washington to meet world leaders at the IMF Springs meeting to try to avoid any new global financial crises. And it comes, of course, at a time when the IMF predicting a rather gloomy outlook once more for the UK economy, forecasting it to be the worst performing G7 economy this year. Let's get more with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. And I say gloomy, not quite as gloomy as they were, but, we've avoided that recession that they were talking about originally.
Indeed, these IMF forecasts are a big deal, not least because a lot of the world's leading economies have sent their finance ministers to the spring meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. So these IMF forecasts, they came out overnight, and I've put up on a graphic what they're actually saying. You can see here that the UK is forecast to shrink the UK economy by minus 0.3% this year. Germany's going to shrink, but by less. The Russian economy, despite being hobbled by sanctions, is growing by about 1% this year. So is Italy, France. The US growing by almost 2%, China by over 6%. Having said that, Mark, as you say, it could have been a lot worse because the IMF was previously forecasting that the UK economy was going to shrink by 0.6%, not 0.3% this year. And that upgrade in UK growth from 0.6 to 0.3 is actually the biggest upgrade that the IMF has made since its October forecasts last year. So we've improved, according to the IMF, but we're still at the back of the pack.
Right, and why the reassessment? Are they trying to work out what damage inflation is doing to all these world economies?
The reassessment, because quite frankly, the British economy is pretty resilient. We're still attracting a lot of foreign direct investment. Manufacturing, while it's been going through its struggles and still coping with sky-high energy bills and that rising corporation tax, is still being very feisty and resilient. Our consumer retail numbers are starting to look reasonably strong. And the IMF is predicting, as for a lot of other economies, that UK interest rates are probably now very near their peak. And then when they start coming down, there should be a boost for both consumers and for businesses.
But worries internationally still about the banking sector and what might still be lying in some of these secondary banks in the United States, for instance?
There are, and I actually think that a lot of reporters have over-egged these comments from the IMF overnight about discussions going on about the international banking sector. Look, the international banking sector, there's always a risk that it's a confidence trick, right? It's a pyramid of trust, if you like. That's how what we call fractional reserve banking works. And I was wondering why it was that the IMF would put out that statement, we're really concerned the global banking system might collapse, so we're discussing how we might try and stop that from happening. I think they're doing that because they know that a lot of the world's central banks, they don't really want to put up interest rates anymore.
No.
But with inflation still quite high, if they don't put interest rates up, they'll lose credibility. So they want a kind of reason to not raise interest rates anymore.
So a bit of messaging going on.
And that reason might be, we might sort of really upset global financial markets and the banking system. Another thing I'd say, and I think there is something in this, quite a lot of people have been saying, why is the IMF so down on the UK economy? And so I've been looking through previous IMF forecasts.
Been marking their homework.
Yeah, well, that's what I do. And out of the last 28 IMF forecasts on the UK economy, 25 have turned out to be more pessimistic than the actual outcome. But then again, our own official forecasters are pessimistic. The Bank of England was saying the UK would go into recession, a recession lasting 5 quarters. The Office for Budget Responsibility was saying the UK would go into recession. But so far, at least, we've dodged that recession, Mark, as you and I have discussed.
But is that in their remit to be on the side of caution just in case?
Well, look, as a former professional economist, let me tell you, you don't get thanked if you say it's going to be fine and then it isn't.
Yeah, it isn't,
I mean, so there's a sort of built-in bias to be gloomy. Then when it turns out better, everyone feels good. But I personally think the IMF's gloominess towards the UK has gone too far. They've been gloomy about the UK for too long. And one reason for that is that I think the organisation has been led by people, not least the former Director General Christine Lagarde, who now runs the European Central Bank, and the current director of the IMF. They really don't like Brexit. They are part of that kind of European intelligentsia who think Brexit is always and everywhere a bad idea. I don't think that's really a controversial comment. I just think that's a statement of fact.
Yeah, and Washington's a long way away as well. You know, there we are. As ever, Liam, thank you for that. And, of course, we'll keep our beady eyes on the state of the economy as ever and update you as we get more figures coming through. But let's keep a beady eye on the weather now, because we're being warned to brace for strong winds and heavy rain. Storm Noah now on its way, or maybe already be here, battering Britain. So we've got yellow weather warnings for wind across parts of the UK, particularly the west there and the southwest, and onto the south coast now, even to Kent. Could cause disruption today. Heavy rain too. This was a situation in Wales. Well, I think spot of snow reported on the high ground, would you believe? High winds continuing to hit southern parts of the country, peaking now 50 to 60 mile per hour gusts expected. Well, let's get someone we can blame, as ever. John Ketley is waiting for us, and they're calling it Storm Noah, and I think it's Meteo France calling it. So the French are even naming our storms now, John.
Yes, it's quite an unbelievable situation, really, Mark. I don't understand it myself, because the UK have got every opportunity to name the storms, especially when it's affecting the UK. But no, they've poo-pooed it again, and they've let the French name it, even though it's affecting the UK much more than it is much of France. So we've had gusts of 74 miles an hour in Portland already down on the south coast, and we've got other serious gusts coming across the southwest and through southern England, really, right the way through the afternoon and well into the evening as well. So we've got these strong severe gale force winds sweeping eastwards at the moment. And also we've got some heavy bouts of rain mixed in too. So squally showers is the way I would put that.
But it is a proper storm, because obviously we're only getting gusts now of 70 mile an hour plus. We've got the trees coming into leaf. I mean, I guess that's when we start seeing trees down, or even power lines and so on. Oh, we've lost the signal for a moment. Maybe it's the weather, who knows? We'll try and reconnect with John. John, can you hear us? Because we've just lost you. No. Well, I do apologise for that. But anyway, I think John was going to indicate to us that it's coastal areas, particularly Devon and Cornwall, that are likely to see the worst of any potential short-term losses of power and disruption to travel. And then we are being told that there are a number of waves of low pressure going to hit us, but temperatures will be up. Today will be the worst. But apologies for that. And apologies to John, too, for actually cutting him off mid-sentence. We'll be back to him tomorrow if we can reconnect. Now, it's good to see the President here. We always welcome our visitor to Northern Ireland, but the end, will it change the political dynamic? That's up to the people of Northern Ireland and the leaders. The words of the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, a short while ago. Let's get more now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's been following this presidential visit to Belfast. Not exactly an overwhelming response there by Sir Geoffrey, as perhaps one might expect, Darren.
Yeah, I don't think we expected this visit to change the dynamic at all, given the fact that President Biden has very deliberately decided not to intervene in any way. But let's be clear about this. You know, the DUP are clearly a bit isolated at the moment. In essence, the Conservative Party are now wholly behind pretty much the Windsor framework. There was a pretty small rebellion a couple of weeks ago against it. All the political parties here, apart from the more even extreme Unionist Party, the TUV, are for the Windsor framework. Clearly the European Union are forward, Downing Street are forward, the White House, President Biden made it clear he's forward. So the DUP, first of all, kind of quite politically isolated, though they're used to it, and they would obviously say they will fight their corner and they're not here to roll over. And then you add to this dynamic as well that actually there's these local elections in a couple of weeks' time here in Northern Ireland. I think the DUP are trying to work out the political dynamic here and unlikely to work before that. But what I would say is when those elections are over, given that political isolation and given what we heard from the President today about the prospect of billions of dollars pouring into Northern Ireland with investments and a trade delegation later on this year, it is entirely possible that that dynamic could quite quickly change. And so, yes, Stormont and its restoration seems very far from being restored anytime soon, but as I say, I really do think things could change quite quickly as we get beyond those elections in May.
Yeah, and interesting that Sinn Féin's leader in Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, saying that this was a clear message to the DUP, but obviously Tony Blair was indicating, don't back the Unionists into a corner on this.
Yeah, very, very carefully worded speech in which President Biden hit a few notes in trying to appeal to Unionists. He talked about his British heritage at one stage, about, the Huguenots and Nottingham, and about the Biden name, trying to emphasise that, yes, well, there'll be an awful lot of focus on his Irish heritage this week, and he's someone who wears that quite heavily on his sleeve. At the same time, he has got British heritage as well. He talked earlier on as well with the Prime Minister about listening, and I think that is a recognition that maybe as President of the United States, he needs to listen a lot more to what the Unionists have got to say. So all in all, a carefully worded speech, one that Unionists were quite kind of warm about in some regards, recognising that President Biden touched upon that this is a decision, the restoration of Stormont, for the people of Northern Ireland, not that something he was going to interfere in.
And just looking at Gabrielle Feenan, who'd introduced President Biden at the university, a 23-year-old recent graduate, saying that the speech was really inspiring, really positive to see all these things of hope and prosperity for the future. And we could see then Joe Biden taking the time at the end of that speech to meet as many people as he could and to talk to them.
Yeah, I think there's been an awful lot of criticism of the speech beforehand about the amount of time that Joe Biden's going to spend here in Northern Ireland. I mean, effectively spend more time, I think, in bed in the hotel than he did actually meeting and talk to people. This is his only public engagement. This is not like we've seen with presidential visits before, where there's a real attempt to connect with the people on the ground here in Northern Ireland. And in the end, actually, probably thousands gathered to try and see, frankly, nothing, because the roads are all blocked off and you couldn't really see very much from where we are, let alone people slightly further back. But he is still the most powerful man in the world. He is still leader of the free world. His words will still matter. He will be able to use those economic instruments, if you like, to try and lure Unionists back to restoration, to Stormont, and to political stability here in Northern Ireland. And so I think in the end, actually, this visit will have a bit of a lasting impact. Yes, it's not going to have a seismic change, and as we've talked about, it's not going to change the dynamics of things here, but I do think it will have some impact, particularly with, as I say, piling on pressure to Unionists to compromise with that memory, if you like, of the Good Friday Agreement, which is what most of the speech was about, this idea for compromise and trying to reach a deal.
And, of course, Senator George Mitchell to visit in the coming days as well. Darren, for the moment in Belfast, thank you very much indeed for that. Just to update you that the Irish government saying that Joe Biden no longer travelling to County Louth in the Republic by helicopter, Marine One, because of the weather conditions. The presidential motorcade instead is on its way. All that coming up with Patrick in the next hour. Stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here